From the very first day of life, Orion saw what no one else saw: mysterious glowing spheres hovering everywhere above the city. Later in class, the teacher explains, mana is the energy that permeates the entire world, and the ability to control it is what magic is. Originally, it was invented as a survival method to ward off monsters. The teacher continues the lesson and says that anyone born with the right talent can use magic simply by saying a spell, and Orion silently sits in his seat, takes notes, and attentively catches every word. When Orion watches the teacher demonstrate, he notices that the glowing spheres in the air disappear every time magic is used, and because of this, he is almost convinced that those spheres are the physical embodiment of mana. The teacher notices how focused Orion is and decides to put him in the spotlight, calls him to the board to try applying the lesson in practice. Before Orion can move, another student suddenly and sharply raises his hand and calls the teacher. It's a boy named Daniel with a smug smile, who tells the teacher that giving Orion a chance is a complete waste of time because he doesn't have a shred of magical talent. A girl named Emily tries to intervene and asks Daniel to calm down, but he immediately becomes defensive and sharply asks if she really intends to side with Orion. Daniel turns to Orion and starts poking him with his finger, abruptly telling him to stop pretending to be special, to stop acting like he sees something, and accusing him of desperately seeking attention. The accusation clearly unsettled Orion, but he surprisingly calmly tells Daniel that he is not resorting to tricks and is not seeking attention. Orion recalls his life and bitterly realizes, seeing mana but not having the talent to use it made everything incredibly difficult. While other children practiced magic, he was simply stuck in his own head. In the memory, a man in a hood reaches out to comfort Orion and tells the boy that he knows he had to go through a hard road. Orion says that it was on this very day that he met the old man who later became his teacher, and recalls how intently he looked at him, as if the old man saw right through him. The old man looks him straight in the eyes and says, "Do not hate who you are and the eyes you were born with." While shining spheres of mana hovered between them, the teacher whispered to Orion that one day his unique vision would become what the whole world needs. Memory blurs as Dan begins to shout Orion's name at the top of his lungs. He points directly at him with his finger and says that he is officially being kicked out of the party. Orion freezes in surprise and asks Daniel what is going on, reminding him that they have been working together on the team for a long time. Daniel does not want to hear it and simply growls at Orion to shut up, calling him a worthless loser. Orion stands in the doorway, completely confused, and asks what he means by calling him useless. Daniel smiled mockingly and told him that he is a burden to the group. He even wonders how Orion still hasn't realized how much he has been dragging them down. Daniel never tires of humiliating Orion, mocking the fact that he is in the legendary heroes squad but can't even master simple magic. He says the only reason he hasn't been kicked out earlier is that they were childhood friends, so he should be grateful they kept him for so long. Orion does not argue he knows the truth. Lowering his eyes, he silently admits to himself that his magic really does not fit the usual requirements and does not work as it should. Despite his flaws, Orion does not back down, insisting that his magic has always saved the team. As soon as he begins to speak, Daniel sharply interrupts him and shouts, "Shut up." While the girls in the group look at this with disgust, Daniel ran up close to him and shouted that Orion's magic is so pathetic that it doesn't matter if it even exists, it has no effect on the team's success. Orion is stunned. He cannot believe that Daniel was hiding so many suppressed grievances behind his back. Daniel does not calm down and continues the verbal attack, saying that it is a real shame to have a loser in the group who cannot even master the 6 basic elements. Orion tries to plan all the logistical details and is not sure if the team is really ready to lose the one who has carried all the magic so far. He knows that without his support spells, their combat power will drop significantly, especially if they encounter enemies that can only be struck by magic. Instead of listening, Daniel simply burst out laughing. He did not take Orion's warning seriously at all. Daniel announced that he is one step ahead and has already found a replacement, an experienced mage with the title of Lord of the 4 Elements, who will take Orion's place. The news hit Orion like an electric shock. He knows that such a title is given only to the strongest mages, and now he understands. If someone of that caliber joins the squad, they no longer need him. When he realized there was no turning back, Orion finally gave up. He turned to Daniel and said that he understands and admits everything. If they feel that way, nothing can be done. He grabbed the door handle and was ready to leave forever. Without wasting time, Daniel drove Orion away and called him a complete loser, but Orion did not respond with insults. He only smiled sadly and said that he was actually glad they traveled together even a little. Daniel grimaced and with an evil smile said that he cannot wait to meet Orion. Rod mocked him as a worthless mage who cannot handle even the simplest things, and added that he will watch with pleasure as his life falls apart after the exile. Orion leaves the group, enters the corridor, and heads to the exit. One question spins in his head: what to do next? Walking through the forest, he finally feels the bitter truth. The guild recorded that he has no rank, and without a proper title no one will want to risk and take him into a new group. Looking back, Orion painfully realizes his former company was only childhood friends. They were together for so many years, and now that story has simply disappeared. He remembers a year ago the moment when their team first gathered, and still sees that day so clearly, as if it were yesterday. In the memory of training, younger Orion strains to follow the rules of modern magic, calls upon the fire mana and whispers a spell for it to turn into a blazing arrow and hit his enemy. Despite all efforts, nothing happens. Orion silently looks at his hand and realizes the mana does not respond at all to his voice or the spell. He gradually understands the real problem is the modern theory of magic itself. It is not at all like what he sees with his own eyes, and he comes to the bitter conclusion if forced to use chance to control mana, he will never succeed. Not relying on textbooks, Orion did differently. He looked directly into the glowing sphere of energy and summoned the crimson mana sitting right in front of him. In school memories, Emily relives the moment when Orion finally stopped talking about his ability to see mana spheres. She watches him from afar and notices how he has changed. She remembers how Daniel mocked him, pointed at him, and called him someone who constantly lies. Emily realizes that Daniel probably just projected his own need for attention onto Orion. Although everyone told Orion that magic was not for him, Emily saw him there every day. He did not give up and did not stop training. Emily goes to look for him, thinking he is in the usual training spot in the forest. Nearby, Orion intently stares at one point and summons the crimson mana he sees in the air. Emily froze in place, eyes wide open. She sees something she cannot explain. Orion loudly calls the magic, and suddenly a huge, swirling ball of fire appears right before him, and Emily is stunned, unable to comprehend the scale of this magic. Orion is stunned. He looks up at the fire he just created and cannot believe that he really managed to do it. Emily almost whispers his name, and Orion jumps up. Seeing the expression on her face, he understands. She just saw everything, even the strange way he pronounced the spell. Orion catches the tremor in Emily's voice when she asks how he managed it, and at that very moment realizes his magic is not at all like everyone thinks. It is a power that, according to their textbooks, should not exist at all. Looking back, Orion lets out an empty laugh. He knows that after this, Emily probably feared him, but he appreciates that she kept his secret and told no one. Orion pondered the future and understood, hiding his true power while trying to find new friends is too much trouble, so for now he decided not to join any group. He stretches for a moment in the middle of the forest and decides, for now I will play solo. Only after so many hours of grinding in the hero team, I deserve rest and silence. He is in no hurry, so he decided to spend his free time unraveling the mystery of his monoseeing eyes. There is plenty of time now, so it is finally worth finding out what is really happening with his power. The scene shifts to a mountain pass. A pack of wolves presses on the carriage, and a young sorceress with braids stands firm with an open magic book while the predators growl nearby. The merchant in the cart looks scared and asks if she can really handle this. She reassures him, apologizes for the fright, and decisively orders him to climb back and hide in the luggage while she deals with the wolves. She aims at the target with a focused gaze and calls forth fiery mana swirling around her. When she spoke the last words of the spell, a magical circle ignited beneath her, and she commanded the flames to gather into a single strike that would fell her enemies. Shouting, she launches a fireball straight at the alpha wolf. The impact is instant. A wave of burning heat spreads along the path. The spell hit the wolf. He howled in pain as the flames struck the target. Seeing her in action, the merchant simply froze in amazement and loudly exclaimed how incredible her magic was, and suddenly it became much easier for him to believe that they would get out alive. The sorceress with braids begins to panic and sweat. She realizes that she has overestimated her strength and does not know what to do, while behind her the merchant does not understand at all what they have gotten into, and is already cheerfully encouraging, thinking that the fight is over and they are safe. Everything gets worse. A huge pack of monsters, jumping dogs, has surrounded the outskirts, and the sorceress understands that there are too many of them to handle alone. In the eyes of one of the wolves, the girl seems tiny and defenseless as she tries to protect the carriage and horses. She tries once more to cast a fire spell, but is too slow. The wolf lunges at her with jaws wide open, and she realizes she won't have time to say the spell to stop it. Just as the wolf is about to sink its teeth into her, a powerful gust of wind magic bursts out from somewhere, sweeping away the monsters, and the sorceress stands in complete shock, clutching the book and not understanding what just happened. Orion bursts onto the scene and asks if she is all right, and she just looks at him completely confused, not understanding where he came from. She thanks him but still cannot come to her senses. It dawns on her that the insanely powerful magic she just saw was done by him. Orion stands nearby and she, to save some face, tells him that the problems were only because there were too many enemies for one person. Looking around, she sees that the situation is still very bad. Even more wolves are coming out from behind the trees, and she admits that it was really hard for her to hold them back. She lowered her gaze to the book and with a slight tremor in her voice said to Orion, "We literally just met, but I really need your help." The sorceress with braids looks Orion straight in the eyes. Her face serious, she puts aside pride and begs to borrow some of his power to deal with this situation. Orion does not hesitate for a second. He gently smiles at her and says that, of course, he will help. Orion gazes at the pack of wolves, as if reading the streams of energy around them. Blue and green mana spheres flicker everywhere. There is almost no red, and he begins to figure out the best way to act in this battle, considering the available types of energy. Orion turned away from the girl and began whispering a spell to lay a fiery foundation. The mage was completely confused and asked what he was doing, because choosing fire without red mana nearby seemed strange. Orion stretches out his hand and grabs a glowing orb, which he calls the emerald mana. With his palm, he begins to tame the energy, and the air around fiercely swirls as he prepares to make his move. In a word, Orion forces the energy to scatter from his hand, bursts a huge spiral explosion of wind magic, tearing the space in front of the carriage. The wind is not just a gust, it transforms into sharp blades that cut through the wolves, and the pack of monsters has no chance because the magic instantly tears them to pieces. The girl mage froze, her eyes wide open in shock. She had never seen anything move so fast and so precisely before. The girl falls to the ground, looks at Orion as if she saw a monster, and in shock asks if he really just used magic without spells, because an ordinary mage is not capable of that. Looking at the field of fallen monsters, she still cannot comprehend what she saw. She cannot believe that he dealt with a whole pack of jumping dogs in just a second. The sorceress with braided hair raised her eyes to Orion. Not believing her eyes, she was completely stunned by what she had just seen and, trembling, asked if he was really some world-famous high-ranking mage hiding his true face. Orion shyly smiles and extends his hand to her, saying that he is just a guy named Orion and nothing special. He was simply kicked out of the previous group of adventurers. The girl does not believe him for a second, approaches very close, her eyes wide with admiration, and asks again if he is really the same Lord Orion she thinks he is. Orion is completely puzzled by her formal address. He repeats it aloud, frowns awkwardly, and does not understand why she suddenly behaves as if he were a king. The witch with braids seems to be in her own world. She grabbed her chest and looks like she is about to faint from joy, saying she never thought she would meet someone like him here. She leans even closer, almost cornering him, and says that the way he simultaneously released the wind blades without any incantations is a true miracle. She is sure he can only be the master. Orion tries to correct her. He says that what he used wasn't even a wind cutter, but she doesn't listen at all and continues showering him with compliments, while the merchant behind them sighs with relief. The danger has finally passed. With stars in her eyes, she suddenly begs Orion desperately, "Make me your apprentice here and now." When she looks at him, her past comes to mind. Since childhood, everyone considered her a true gift in magic, and that is why the noble Berg family took her in. Finally, she got into the Royal Academy of Magic, where all the geniuses of the country go, and even among the elite, she shone, earning the highest scores and mastering 3 different elements. Alice thoughtfully assesses her position. She was even given the rank 4 elements for the ability to layer 4 different magical properties. She proudly looks at the power gained through training, but knows sitting idly and being satisfied with what she has is not an option. She still remembers that old friendly match. Seeing how Orion fought, she looked at everything completely differently. It was a real shock for her. When she looked at him, she noticed his magic activated even before he managed to say the last word of the spell, and it seemed to her that he was just pretending to read the text to hide how truly fast he was. At that moment, she had to admit, her magic was still significantly behind his level. She immediately decided to become a witch like Orion and take on as many tasks as possible to catch up with him, but after a recent clash with wolves, it became clear that things did not go as she imagined. Returning to reality in front of Orion at the local cafe, a huge steaming mountain of food plopped down with a loud splash. Alice says to Orion, "Order everything you want." She insists on paying the entire bill. This is how she thanks him for having saved her and the merchant earlier. The innkeeper passes by, looks at Alice's plate with feigned surprise, and asks if that is really all she is going to eat. He couldn't resist and let slip that every time she comes in, she orders food for 3. Alice instantly blushed and, completely flustered, whispered to him to be quiet, while Orion quietly observed everything. Alice blushes and admits that one portion of food is clearly not enough for her. Orion looks at the huge plate already on the table and says that the food seems more than enough, but gradually begins to understand she is really serious. While Alice greedily eats the dish, Orion asks if she can really eat that much, and immediately adds that for a traveler, a big appetite and the ability to grab a snack at the first opportunity is actually an important skill. Wasting no time, Alice calls the tavern owner and asks for 2 more portions, and Orion just sighs and says he completely expected this. When dinner is over, Alice straightens up in her chair and turns to Orion with a very serious look. She clasps her hands on her knees, a little embarrassed, and asks him if this time she can properly introduce herself. She stands up, straightens her shoulders, and solemnly tells him that her name is Alice Berg, that she is a graduate of the Royal Academy of Magic and masters 3 elements: fire, water, and wind. But she is not finished yet. She explains that she can actually layer these properties and create a rank of 4 elements, promises she will not be a burden to him, and begs him to take her as an apprentice. Orion looked at her, completely frozen with surprise. He thought that mastering the 4 elements at her age was simply madness, and that she was a talent of world-class level. He froze in place with a confused face, feeling completely helpless, because he had no idea what to teach someone as gifted as she was. The tavern owner brought out a huge smoking plate and sincerely apologized for the long wait. The innkeeper laughed loudly and slapped Orion on the shoulder. He almost choked on his drink, and the innkeeper said he had heard about the famous Orion from Alice. The innkeeper did not stop. He called Orion a true revolutionary who ignored the usual guild rules, and Alice just sat there blushing awkwardly because he said she had been talking about him all the time. Orion continued eating and told Alice that she overestimated him. He was not some incredible mage, apologized, but could not take her as an apprentice. Alice seemed shattered by this refusal, barely finding words to respond. Trying to change the subject, Orion enthusiastically praised the food and asked Alice what she thought of it, but Alice just stared at the plate and felt that everything was going not as she had hoped. When they finally finished that huge meal, full and satisfied, they sincerely thanked the innkeeper for the food, and he smiled and invited them to return and come again whenever they wished. Standing outside, Alice sincerely thanked Orion, said that he had helped her a lot today, and Orion just smiled and replied that he had fun too. Walking into the night, Orion thought about how brilliant she was able to control all 4 elements at once, and suddenly realized they were from different worlds and probably would never see each other again. The next day at the Adventurers Guild, Alice rushed up to him with a huge smile, shouting, "Master," and Orion realized escaping from her would not be so easy. Orion loses self-control and shouts that he already told her he is not fit to be a master, and Alice does not care at all. She only makes a funny grimace and sticks out her tongue. They enter the building, and just then a huge burly man with a blindfold notices them. He asks Alice what she is doing here at all, and she just waved her hand and declared that it was a complete coincidence they just accidentally bumped into each other. Alice blushed and accidentally revealed that she saw Orion and was following him, immediately panicked and rushed to take back her words, assuring that she was not stalking him at all, but Orion knew better and mentally decided that she was definitely following him. Orion carefully looks at the guild task board, reviews the announcements and their scales, and although not surprised, irritably notices there really is no decent work here for his level. Alice asks him what kind of adventure he is really looking for, and Orion admits that he has not chosen anything specific yet and adds that because of his low adventurer level, it is hard for him to find something worth attention. The board is cluttered with G-level tasks, from searching for lost cats to cleaning slime in the sewer. Orion looks at this and sighs, exactly what I expected from my rank, just boring trifles. Suddenly Alice has a brilliant idea and she shouts to Orion, "Wait here a second." She runs out and returns a moment later with a bunch of papers in her hands, shows them to Orion and asks what he thinks about taking a few quests from this pile instead. Orion starts flipping through the papers she brought and admits they really look like great job options, but it is clear that he hesitates about something. He reminds Alice that he cannot just take these tasks, he is still stuck at G level. He explains that although the offers are attractive, according to the documents he is not registered as a mage and has no right to take high-level orders such as C or D rank missions. Alice laughs to herself as if she has a perfect plan, slaps the table and tells Orion that this is exactly where she comes in to save the day. She admits that she is actually a C-rank adventurer and hints at a clever loophole. If Orion makes her his apprentice, then through the guild master-apprentice system he will be able to take C-rank tasks as her mentor. Orion is not fooled, he says directly that it sounds unrealistic. He glanced at her and sarcastically asked if he should start calling her Master Alice because she is of a higher rank. Alice completely loses her head, she waves her hands in panic and shouts at Orion never to call her that. Orion waved his hand. Relax and be realistic, I was just joking. Orion stops joking and in a firm voice explains that it will not benefit her to make some rankless guy her master, and reminds her that the Adventurers Guild in this world holds great weight. He says that the guild ranks directly determine an adventurer's status, and since the guild has already decided that he is rankless, Alice's attempt to make him her master would look like she is challenging her own authority. Orion reminds her that she is a graduate of the Royal Academy of Magic with a brilliant future, and sincerely says he does not want to be the one to ruin her reputation. Alice does not even want to hear this and shouts back that she does not care at all about her career or what others think of her. Alice gloomily lowers her eyes and whispers to Orion that she actually just wants him to teach her magic. Orion looks at Alice with a worried expression and says that she is probably still under the impression of that danger, so her thoughts are confused. Alice disagrees, pouting. She tells him that this is not true at all. Becoming serious, Alice explains that somewhere there is magic that is not taught in any academy. She says she wants to chase every opportunity and is completely convinced that Orion's magic is the key to what she is looking for. Orion rubbed his chin and understood. She's not going to back down at all. He sighs deeply and finally gives in a little. He tells her, just be nearby and watch a little how I do it. Alice looks stunned and Orion adds that if after some time she still feels the same, he will reconsider her request. He asks her what she thinks about that deal, secretly hoping that when she calms down, she will realize how crazy it is to want someone like him to become her teacher. Alice blushed with admiration and asked if this was some kind of entrance exam to become his student, but Orion immediately interrupted her and said she was wrong. Alice promised Orion that since this is only a trial period, she will become so indispensable that he won't be able to live a day without her. Leaning right into his face, she said to Orion, better prepare yourself for what's coming. Orion buried his head in his hands, completely stressed, and couldn't understand how his life had become like this. Later, they find themselves in the lawn mower forest, and Orion clearly says that for now there will be neither master nor student, they will just take on a simple level G quest, and Alice energetically shouts her agreement. With stars in her eyes, Alice exclaims that today she will learn from him everything she can. Orion looks at her radiant expression and feels pressure. It seems a bit strange to him that she hopes so much after all, they just came to weed. He sincerely warns her, as soon as she realizes how boring this work will be, she will probably regret coming. Alice glanced at the task list and saw that they needed to find red and green herbs, so it really is a simple gathering mission. Alice points to a small thicket and suggests going there to search, but Orion immediately stops her and says she doesn't need to worry. Orion explains that instead he is looking for green and orange mana. He extends his hand and orders the mana to comb the surroundings. Mana spheres rushed into the forest, whistling in the air. Alice watches them go, clearly puzzled by what Orion is actually doing. Glowing balls dive into the bushes and hover right above certain plants hidden in the greenery. Orion towers, his magic spreading and enveloping everything around, while Alice just stands, frozen with her mouth open, trying to understand how much mana he is scattering on such a simple task. Orion stared intently into the forest and with quiet confidence knew that the search was going exactly as he planned. He tells Alice that he has almost figured out where everything lies, and she looks at him as if he is crazy and asks, "What are you even talking about?" The entire clearing was lit up by dozens of glowing spheres shining like tiny lanterns, each precisely indicating where the needed herbs grow. Orion shoved his hand into the thick, tall grass, pulled out a perfect specimen, examined it with a self-satisfied smile, and said the quality was quite good. Alice completely lost her head. She burst into tears from shock, seeing how he so easily bypassed the search stage in the quest. She demands to know how he could have known at all that the grass was right here, and Orion, on his knees, just looks at her and says that it's simple, his magic works that way. Alice tries to come to terms with the explanation, repeating to herself that theoretically it makes sense, but seeing it with her own eyes, she still finds it hard to comprehend. Meanwhile, the spheres continue to point to even more grass nearby. Alice is still stunned by what she sees and admits that in her life she has never encountered magic of detection with such precision. Orion waved it off, said he doesn't even know how to use complex techniques like detect magic, then approached the next spot and pointed to even more grass nearby. He examines the familiar red and green grasses and doubts whether he chose the wrong one. Then he shows her another freshly picked plant and her gaze immediately freezes on it. Alice suddenly bursts into a hysteric fit, yells at him, and asks if he even understands that in his hands is yellow grass. She explains that it is an extremely rare material, and Orion just looks puzzled and asks if it really is such a big deal. Alice carefully hides the grass to preserve it, and Orion just watches and thinks to himself that that grass really wasn't so hard to find. Suddenly Orion's face changed. He fell silent and stared into the distance, and the manhwa in the air began to transform. He raises his gaze to the trees and sees how the mana spheres begin to come alive. He becomes curious about what is happening here. The quiet search is interrupted when a huge burly monster in bone armor bursts through the trees, and Orion realizes there is definitely something dangerous with them in the forest. Frightened Alice asks Orion, "Did you just hear that terrible roar?" They were supposed to simply complete a routine G-rank herb gathering task, but everything went awry. Alice calls Orion in panic, and he calmly says that something is definitely hiding nearby. Alice looked ahead and froze in horror. In the distance, between them and the rest of the forest, stood a huge, dark figure of a monster. Alice immediately sensed danger and asked if it was really the Orc King. The monster's face was terrible, fangs and cold white eyes were visible. Alice trembles, asking why a monster of such a high level was even in a low-level zone. Orion is not afraid at all, his watchful gaze fixed on the beast. Alice explained that this forest is usually safe for beginners, but Orion just shrugged and indifferently said, "Maybe it just needs to be killed," and Alice completely lost her mind. Orion did not wait for a plan. He simply stepped forward, extended his hand toward the monster, and summoned green and orange mana spheres hanging in the air. The mana instantly responds to his command. Colossal power bursts from the sky and crashes down directly on the orc leader, not allowing him to move. Orion utters a spell, and suddenly a hail of giant boulders falls from the heavens. The monster is buried under their weight within seconds. Alice froze with a blank stare. She could not comprehend how he so easily dealt with a boss-level threat. Orion just sighed as if nothing happened and ordered the remaining mana to disperse. When the dust settled, Alice finally found her voice and let out a long scream from pure shock at what she had just seen. Alice is still stunned by the explosion and asks Orion what magic he just used. Orion blushes slightly, rubs the back of his head, and as if nothing happened, says it was essentially a meteor strike. Alice cannot calm down and shouts that he did not just use the highest level magic, he cast a triple spell and did not even utter a single formula. Orion tries to brush it off and change the subject, but Alice approaches right up to his face. She does not let go and demands to know what happened to his power. Alice explains that the Orc King is a huge threat, usually defeated only by a whole team of rank A adventurers. Orion is truly surprised and asks if they are really that strong, quietly regretting that he allowed his true power to be shown. They both stand looking at the huge crater where the monster once was. Alice shouts that it is impossible to kill such a creature alone, and Orion realizes he has become too relaxed around her if he boasts like that. When Alice crouched down to examine the remains, Orion became serious for a moment and asked if his magic scares her because it is completely outside usual logic. Alice raises her eyes to him with a shining smile, completely embarrassed. Why is he even asking that? She looked at her hands and said that her magic is still far from the goal, then turned back to him. If there is hidden potential somewhere, of course, it must be sought with all effort. Alice simply shone with admiration. She declared that he is truly the best mage in the world and from now on officially calls him master. Alice shines with sincere admiration, and Orion simply loses his head. He is all sweaty and completely stunned by the sudden title and passionate praise. Orion looks at Alice and sees in her a girl driven only by ambition and feels the weight of her passionate hopes. He begins to fear that taking her as an apprentice is a bad idea. He feels that if he lets her follow him, he will be the one responsible for her wasting her whole life. They go to the Adventurers Guild, and Orion decides to tame her enthusiasm by showing her the most boring, everyday details of his daily life. Behind the guild counter, Alice slammed down a huge basket of herbs, loudly exclaimed that the quest was completed, and asked people to accept the delivery. The guild receptionist stared in shock at the pile of herbs and asked how Alice managed to gather so many, since she only started this job today. The receptionist loudly points out that Alice brought the wrong plants and says directly these are not yellow herbs. They argue, while Orion stands aside and realizes that his plan has failed. He wanted to hide behind boring work, but instead everything turns into a tiring mess for Alice. Orion decides to change tactics. He looks at Alice and tells her that it's time to move on to something else. He tells her that from tomorrow he has decided to devote himself to magical research, not simple gathering tasks. Alice's face instantly lit up. She stepped closer and with a passionate glow in her eyes asked if she would really be allowed to observe her mentor conducting magical research. Orion suddenly froze from her wild energy. He realizes he should have anticipated such a reaction because she is obsessed with the highest level of magic. The scene shifts to the dungeon of Scorch. The group realizes with horror that Orion has really disappeared, and someone asks did he really abandon them. Emily, the group's ranger, loses her temper and asks how they are going to hunt the dragon without Orion's help, while Luna, the knight no less furious, shouts that this must be some sick joke. Daniel looks at them as if they have lost their minds and says, "Why fuss over a trifle whether Orion is here or not? It doesn't matter, such a useless guy wouldn't have changed anything anyway." He says that today is dragon hunting, and for a loser who can't even do simple magic, the equipment is probably too heavy to carry anyway, while Emily just stands with her head down and looks completely broken. Emily is simply in shock. She looks at Daniel and doesn't understand what the hell he is even talking about. She begins to recall their past battles and suddenly realizes the only reason they got this far is Orion's magic. She deeply feels within herself that it was he who secretly filled all the gaps and covered their mistakes all this time. Daniel will not tolerate this and tells her directly that it simply cannot be true. He asks why Orion would be without a rank if he really was as cool as she says. Emily begins to respond, but the words get stuck in her throat. She falls silent and looks away. She suddenly remembers that childhood moment in the forest and instantly understands. Back then everything happened because of her. Her fear of his power made Orion start hiding his special abilities from everyone. Emily still does not dare to explain this to Daniel. She just stands sad, and the silence increasingly irritates Daniel. Daniel completely loses his composure, shouts at the girls, "Shut up," and then offendedly asks if they really doubt his decisions as a leader. He constantly pretends to be cool and says that it doesn't matter if they are hunting a dragon as long as there is a hero like him nearby. This whole adventure will be a breeze, while Luna and Emily stand exhausted and completely unconvinced. Emily looks away, guilt gnaws at her. She thinks that probably Orion finally couldn't stand their behavior and decided to leave forever. Luna also begins to understand the truth. Her face is tense, she is clearly worried, and the thought that in fact Orion has been carrying the team's burden all this time does not give her peace. Daniel angrily stomps, going deeper into the dungeon, and it becomes clear he is the only one who has no idea what is really happening and how much they need Orion. The heat in the scorched dungeon begins to wear them down. Daniel is already drenched in sweat and shouts about how unbearable the heat is here. Daniel threw a tantrum and loudly shouts why it is so hot here, and Emily can barely stand. She asks him to be quiet and reminds him that they literally just entered the dungeon. Emily takes a sip to cool down a bit, but it is clear how hard it is for her in this suffocating atmosphere. Finally, she realized why this time everything is much more difficult. She explains that before they were comfortable only because Orion was constantly casting spells, regulating the temperature for everyone. Daniel still doesn't believe it and tells her to stop talking this nonsense. He is too angry to notice the huge pack of monsters quietly sneaking up from the shadows. Luna quickly covers Daniel's mouth to make him shut up and whispers, "SHH, your constant shouting is already annoying the bats in the dungeon." Emily notices the approaching danger and instantly draws her bow, aiming into the shadows where the monsters are hiding. Everything instantly goes awry when a huge swarm of bats crashes down from the ceiling. Emily looks at their number, realizes they are completely surrounded, and asks the others what the plan is. Even Daniel now feels the pressure. He is very tense and finally admits to himself that without Orion's help, dealing with this situation will be much harder than he thought. Although he was shaking with nerves, Daniel decided to pretend to be brave. He drew his sword and rushed into the crowd, shouting to the girls, "Leave everything to me," while Luna tried to stop him, but he was already gone. His heroic moment was instantly cut short. A bat immediately latched onto his head and started biting. He broke free and screamed in pain. Daniel was confused, just a bundle of nerves, complaining that he couldn't even hit those small, fast targets, while Luna just stood aside, looking bigger, and said she definitely knew how this would end. Luna raised a protective barrier to keep the bats away, but it was clear she was already at her limit. She asked Emily to say what to do next because her defense wouldn't hold for long. Emily sharply pulls out a special arrow with an attached crystal, firmly says she will handle it, and calls everyone to get ready to run at full speed. The group scatters and flees, retreating beaten and bruised. Daniel still grumbles, wondering why he ended up in such a miserable mess. After the disastrous cave expedition, silence fell. Luna looks completely shattered and says that if they keep dragging on like this, the dragon hunt will never happen, so they urgently need to find Ryan and beg him to return to the team. Daniel completely disagreed with this proposal. He blushed, got angry, and shouted that he would never do anything so humiliating, then tried to justify his failure, saying he just had a bad day and it was no big deal. Though it is hard for him, Daniel's pride does not let him give up. Determination burns in his eyes, and he tells himself he will complete the dragon-slaying quest at any cost and will do it without any help from Orion. Later, the team sets off to the Adventurers Guild, hoping to get out of trouble, and the administrator looks at them with barely concealed regret and explains that the message has already been sent. Their request was denied. Daniel instantly causes a scene at the counter, shouting that such a prestigious hero team cannot be refused so easily. Luna pulls him back and asks him to calm down, but he is too busy throwing a tantrum. While Daniel was pouring out his tirade, he insisted that they would have passed the dungeon without problems if they had at least a decent mage with them. At that moment, he noticed Alice sitting at a table on the opposite side of the room and pointed her out to the girls. Alice is just trying to mind her own business but feels Daniel's gaze on her. She looks around and instantly thinks irritably that he is some creepy weirdo staring at her like that. Daniel switches on his charm, approaches, strikes a funny, shiny pose, smiles, and asks Alice if she is the one everyone calls Alice. Alice is not impressed by his performance at all. She looks at him with distrust, confirms that is her name, and immediately asks who he is. Luna again tries to make Daniel stop bothering people, but he does not notice her at all. He straightens up and proudly announces that he is Daniel, leader of the legendary Hero Squad. Alice repeats Hero Squad in response to Daniel. Her voice quiets and breaks. A picture begins to form in her mind, and she realizes who she is talking to. Her eyes narrow. She looks at him much colder and directly asks if they were the ones who kicked Orion out of their group. Daniel doesn't catch her tone at all and continues to act important, saying that the guild probably doesn't tell the whole truth, adds that he came to scout her, praises how impressive it is that she mastered 4 elements at such an age, and declares that he wants her power for his team. Alice doesn't even let him finish. She decisively says no, and Daniel's face instantly falls. He can't understand such a sudden refusal. She walks right past them, firmly says that she has somewhere to go, and asks them to move aside to let her through. Daniel starts to panic, breaks out in sweat, and shouts after her, demanding an explanation for why she refused such a huge opportunity. In despair, he roars about all the perks. Supposedly, if she joins, she will have fame, status, and everything she could wish for, and even promises to pay her whatever she asks just to make her stay. Alice freezes for a moment, looks around, and admits, saving the world is a great responsibility and a role that is truly important to most people. A gentle smile blooms softly on her face, her cheeks blush, and she tells him that there is one person, Orion, next to whom she really wants to stay. While Daniel and Luna stand completely stunned, Alice explains that she has finally found her purpose. She wants to stay with Orion and therefore will not join their company. Daniel freezes for a moment, processing everything he heard. It is clear that he is tense and trying to look calm. He says he understands, but immediately asks who that person is that she is so fixated on. As soon as that name slips from his lips, Daniel breaks out in sweat, exclaims that she means Orion, and the realization hits Luna so hard that she is completely stunned. Daniel immediately becomes rude again and tells Alice to forget that idea. Orion is just unrated junk. He won't even last in their team. He does not calm down and mockingly insists that Orion will never survive as a lone adventurer. Luna lowers her eyes, feeling uneasy, and calls Daniel, trying to calm him down. Alice finally could not stand it. The dreadful tension dissipated. She looked at him and told Daniel that even if he is a hero, there are things that simply should not be said. Her gaze was so piercing that Daniel simply gave up. He began to whimper as if he was about to break down from fear. Daniel jumped back. The air in the room became heavy with Alice's anger, and he was completely frightened of the sorceress he had just tried to recruit. He seemed about to cry, barely able to make a sound, while Alice still looked at him intently. Suddenly Alice's face seemed to change, as if she came to her senses and exclaimed that she had been wrong in her reaction. Alice instantly bowed low, apologizing again and again, and admitted she had simply lost patience. She could not stay silent when he insulted someone she admired. Alice is burning with shame, hides her face in her hands, and awkwardly says that she is terribly embarrassed for having lost her temper like that. Alice looked at Luna and told her not to worry, but it was clear that Luna was still offended that the party leader had allowed himself such words, and she only responded with a nervous, uneasy smile. Alice finally decides that it is time to leave. She tells the group she is going because she made Orion wait too long. Behind her, Daniel hides, completely exhausted and humiliated. When Alice left, Luna lowered her gaze and thought with regret that she had completely missed the chance to ask her more about what Orion is currently doing. Looking out the window as Alice walks away, Luna involuntarily asks herself if everything is all right with Orion, but immediately dismisses the thought. She believes she no longer has the right to show him her face. Inside, Daniel is simply boiling with rage. He clenches his fist and quietly, angrily lets out a cry, unable to endure how the conversation went. Luna persistently tries to convince him, telling Daniel that he is wrong and should be much kinder to Alice, but Daniel does not want to listen. He sharply interrupts her and orders her to be silent and not to tell him what to do. Tension in the room hung in the air. People in the nearby tavern began whispering, asking each other if everyone saw what just happened. Rumors spread everywhere. People laugh at Daniel because supposedly he was scared of some girl and even attacked her, and one even says that the current hero is important only because of his master Edward. Daniel hears every word of theirs and it drives him crazy. He looks into nowhere, realizing that his reputation is suffering much more than he expected. Daniel finally could not stand it and, blushing, roared at the crowd staring in the tavern, "Leave me alone, my life is not your show," and nearby stands Luna, gloomily worried. Luna pulls Daniel by the sleeve and whispers that it is better to just leave here, and he seems about to explode from all this irritation. As they walk away, in the background you can literally hear Daniel growling with rage, and Luna gets distracted and thinks about what Orion is doing right now. Meanwhile, Orion returned to his room, calm and focused. In his hands is a notebook, and he told himself that it is time to get to work. He looks at a book titled Introduction to Magic and thoughtfully wonders why people so often have difficulty casting their spells. Orion sits on the bed, surrounded by glowing mana spheres that only he can see, and knows that usually problems are due to lack of mana or poor imagination, but since he sees mana directly, he simply commands it to create magic whenever it wants. He realizes this unique gift has caused all that tangled, dirty chaos, and at that moment a voice of Alice sounded from behind the door, calling him Master. Orion opened the door and noticed that Alice had unexpectedly come earlier. She was standing on the threshold, ready to go, and looked, as always, cheerful. Alice smiles broadly and tells him that she is so excited she can hardly wait. Alice asks what they will be doing today. Orion says they will stick to the basics of magic, but warns, for her, it might seem a bit boring compared to what she is used to. Orion is getting more and more nervous. If he continues to fail even the simplest spells, Alice will sooner or later see through him as a fraud and regret becoming his student. He still tries to put on a show. He stretches out his hand and utters a spell. Fiery mana gathers from it and strikes, and Alice stands right behind him, watching with full admiration and waiting for something big to happen. Orion asks her to prepare for what is coming, but Alice just looks at him as if a huge question mark is hanging over her head, and he feels that this awkward cycle repeats all day, and he cannot move forward. Finally, Alice can't stand it and shouts, "Why doesn't the magic work at all?" And Orion blushes with shame. How humiliating to fail like this in front of a true genius of magic, which she is. He calls the mana of fire, wind, and water in turn, but nothing happens. He is forced to admit to himself that he has no success anywhere. When his attempts fail one after another, Orion thinks that Alice has already reached her limit and simply abandoned him. He expected that by this time she would be completely indifferent. He begins to sweat. Constant failures exhaust him mentally. He makes one more desperate attempt, calling Earth Mana, hoping that at least something will happen and save his pride. Just as he was about to try again, Alice raised her hand and called him to get his attention. Orion looks at her, depressed, sure that she has finally grown tired of his clumsiness and is about to tell him so directly. But he is completely useless for anything. Alice looks uncertain, lowers her eyes, and says that what she is about to say may sound a bit rude, but Orion is not offended and gently reassures her. It's perfectly normal, so don't worry. Alice is fascinated by this, and she says that as a sorceress, she simply cannot contain her curiosity about what is happening. Orion is a little embarrassed by her sudden energy and just looks confused, trying to understand what she means. Alice raises a finger and directly asks him if he really doubts the magic textbooks and thinks they are full of lies. The idea hit Orion with full force. He froze and could not comprehend. Could the magic textbooks really have been wrong all this time? Looking at a pile of old books, Orion suddenly realized he had never even suspected that the commonly accepted notions about the world could be false. He had always considered himself broken and had long lost hope of ever understanding magic. He looked at her and asked if she was really some kind of genius for noticing this. Alice was completely confused and blushed. Orion rummages through the shelves and suddenly it dawned on him. If he completely changes his point of view, then there is no longer any point in studying these traditional theories, and Alice just looks at him, a little puzzled. Returning to her, Orion tells Alice that he has a request and needs her help too. The offer to help with something completely caught her by surprise. At first, Alice eagerly agrees to help, but her enthusiasm instantly fades when she finds out what Orion really wants. He has a basket full of scales in his hands, and she asks if those are really wind dragon scales and why he needs so many, and Orion explains that there are probably many more in the warehouse and he intends to use them for an experiment. Orion initiates the process, knowing exactly that passing mana through these scales produces green and blue spheres. He raises his hand above the basket and the mana begins to react exactly as he expected. The room was prepared so that fire magic hardly works here. Orion tells Alice that he is counting on her, and she responds with a confident nod. Alice takes a stance and calls the fire mana to manifest, while Orion watches attentively and says he wants to see exactly how the mana changes during this. And at that moment Orion's eyes opened wide, drops of sweat ran down his forehead. He sees what should not be, and cannot believe that it is happening right before him. From his point of view, the mana is visible as if on the palm when the spell requires it to become the basis of fire, and he is stunned that the world perceives magic completely opposite to what he sees. When the spell commands the magic to strike, Orion notices the mana does not resist the logic of the words at all. On the contrary, it changes color and perfectly obeys the spell. Alice shouted fireball, and although the room was supposed to muffle the sound, suddenly a huge explosion of fire burst out. Alice is stunned by such insane power. Orion is completely confused and asks Alice if she felt something strange. Alice just looks at him, completely silently. I'm completely confused. I cannot understand why he is so tense. Alice looks at Orion embarrassed. She does not understand why he is so upset, says that everything seems usual to her, and asks what the matter is. It turns out that once people invented spells to use magic without visible mana spheres, and Orion suddenly realizes that for everyone else this invisible process is just normal. Moving on, Orion suggests trying air magic, and Alice readily picks up the idea. It seems to her just a regular test to check how well the scales work as a catalyst. Orion utters the word catalyst in his mind and suddenly realizes that he feels surprisingly good. At the same time, he notices that others do not see mana spheres, so they probably think the scale itself is the source of power, not just what changes the mana in the air. While they prepare, Orion admits to himself that he has no idea how magic is studied nowadays. Alice begins the spell, calling the spirits of the wind to gather. Orion watches her. Every technical term she utters is new to him. He is almost sure that she herself does not fully understand what he is looking for, but Alice remains focused and commands the wind to dance. Although they are not quite on the same wavelength, Orion feels that both share the same burning excitement for experiments. Alice shouted wind cut, and released the spell. Sharp gusts of wind sliced through the air. Orion laughs, clearly riding the wave of success, wipes sweat from his face, and tells Alice that they need to find the rest of the scales and continue the experiments. Suddenly, Orion freezes. He is struck by a realization. He understands that he seriously messed up. He got too deep into the research. His whole plan was to make Alice give up being his opera apprentice, but instead he has just been fangirling next to her all along. Alice is fully immersed in the research, glowing with excitement, and asks Orion if there are any other scales or experiments they could try next. The scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where Daniel stands by the counter, and the receptionist solemnly addresses him. Hero Daniel. Returning to Orion, he decides to just go with the flow. Although the plan to scare Alice failed, it is not a problem for him, yet he is having a great time anyway. In the guild's reception, the administrator informs Daniel that the guild master Edward is calling for him, and Daniel stands confused. Why was he summoned so suddenly? Daniel walks to the office, a bit tense. He can't shake the thought of what exactly the master wants from him right now. Daniel enters the office and sees Edward waiting behind the desk. At that moment, Edward simply says his name. Suddenly, Edward shouted at the top of his lungs and called Daniel a real idiot right to his face. Daniel is noticeably trembling and covered in cold sweat, nervously asking his master why he can be so angry. Edward becomes even sterner and directly asks Daniel what he was thinking when he expelled Orion. A wave of panic washes over Daniel. How did his mentor find out about this? Daniel tries to stay calm, telling Edward that Orion is just a nobody without a rank, but inside he is drowning in panic because he thought Orion just ran away. And there was no one nearby, so no one saw how the expulsion happened. Edward is finally fed up. He covers his eyes with his hand and sighs heavily. Sai cannot believe what a fool his student has become right now. He explains to Daniel that the guild could not properly assess Orion because his magic is simply off the charts, and the usual indicators are useless against someone of that level. Daniel trembles, sweat running down his skin. He does not believe what he heard and keeps repeating to himself that it cannot be true. In his imagination, Daniel is still a cool hero, sincerely believing that he is the center of the party and that he does all the hard work for the girls. He started to be gnawed by the fact that the one he despised was actually carrying the whole team. Moving on, after the expulsion, a bitter truth emerges. A sorceress from his squad hisses in his face, "Wake up and face the truth," and Luna is in full panic, finally realizing that Orion really disappeared. In the memory, monsters close in around Daniel. He is surrounded and completely helpless, and Edward with a bitter smile says that since they expelled Orion, the team has only been suffering defeats. Daniel invents excuses for his recent defeats with trembling words, insisting that lately he has just had a slight decline. Edward does not believe it all. He looks intently at Daniel and asks if he really thinks that all those disasters were. It was just a failure. Daniel lowered his head, looking completely broken and tiny. Standing before his master's table, he barely replies that it is just a decline, but there is not a drop of confidence in his voice. Edward steps back from the table, leaving Daniel in deafening silence, throws the last advice: cast aside pride and call Orion, because if you don't do it now, it will be too late to save the party. Daniel seems about to break and aloud admits that he ruined everything, but inside he boils and orders himself not to do anything stupid. Pride does not allow him to retreat. He endlessly tells himself that he is a hero and that his judgment could not have been wrong, chasing away the truth only with denial. Orion and Alice were walking through the city together, and Orion felt a little guilty. He apologized for constantly asking her to perform magic for his trials without explaining why, and Alice blossomed with a smile and said that she actually learns a lot from his experiments. She enthusiastically tells how much pleasure it is to practice magic with high-quality catalysts, and in her imagination, working alongside Orion is simply the best place for any mage. Orion tells her that he is glad that she is satisfied with the arrangement, but he himself is still a bit reserved. Alice does not notice this at all and quietly hums to herself as they walk. Alice is completely lost in her thoughts. Petals and sparks shimmer around, and she is sure that this little walk through the city is actually a date with her master. She was so happy that she began to spin and dance right in the middle of the street. Orion looked back, completely confused by her sudden energy, and asked what happened, and she pretended to be calm and said nothing, although it was clear that she was still glowing with joy. Orion thinks about how much she does for him. He wants to give her something or do something nice as a sign of gratitude, but it is clear that he simply cannot come up with anything. He enters the local store to look at trinkets, but quickly realizes that he is completely lost and honestly admits to himself he has no idea. Tell me the truth, what do girls really like? Orion froze in shock when Alice suddenly shouted to the seller to add one more portion. She is shining with joy because of the food. Orion stops, calls her by name to get her attention, then hands over a huge steaming bun. Stars instantly sparkle in Alice's eyes, and deeply touched by this gesture, she asks if he really minds if she takes it. Alice almost cried and with sincere trembling said that she would keep this gift from the master for life, and Orion just waved it off. Don't dramatize, eat it before it cools down. Orion asks if she is hungry at all. The bun is huge, and Alice, not wanting to reveal her hunger, says she is not hungry at all, but at that very moment her stomach loudly growled and gave everything away. Dropping the act, Alice sincerely thanks him and, walking through the city streets, begins to eat greedily. She stuffs her mouth and exclaims excitedly, "What a taste!" She looks as if in paradise. They sit at a table on the balcony to rest, and Orion looks at her and sincerely admits that he was impressed by the magic she showed earlier. He recalls how she performed magic in the library, how easily she fit into that room, and sincerely tells her that what impressed him most was the beauty of her magic. Alice completely loses her head and suddenly bursts into bright light. She blushes brightly from the compliment, awkwardly waves it off, and says that she is still very far from his level. Orion reinforced the compliment with words that he was not even sure if he could evoke that magic again, and Alice instantly blushed apparently. It lifted her mood, but at the same time her conscience gnawed a little, so she apologized for using such a valuable catalyst. Orion just shrugged and reassured her that it was all right because he was the one who asked her to do it. The air suddenly sharply cooled. Alice looked into the basket and screamed in panic there were no red dragon scales left at all, and Orion, completely disappointed, whispered that it would be a real loss if they could no longer experience that impressive magic. He decisively decides that giving up is not an option and suggests going to buy more. He is sure that something they can take will definitely be found in the local guild. They go to the guild. Orion approaches the counter, catches the receptionist's attention, and without unnecessary words says that he wants to buy several red dragon scales. The receptionist looked at his adventurer card embarrassedly and asked in surprise why a guy who only has G rank needs such an expensive high-class catalyst. Suspicion flashed in her eyes and she stubbornly looked at him as if asking what he was even going to do with something of that level. Orion answers vaguely, supposedly for some small research. The receptionist does not believe him and lectures him, saying that meddling in other people's affairs is unbecoming. She does not back down, insists that magic should be used in a manner befitting his status, and laughs, saying that expensive materials alone will not help his skill. Alice simply explodes with indignation and starts shouting at the woman for addressing her master that way. Orion is forced to hold her firmly with his hands, trying to calm her down so they do not cause a scene in the middle of the guild. Orion grumbles irritably because the guild has no red dragon scales, and the receptionist, winking, asks if he wants them that badly, then jokingly says that if he is so desperate, let him go cut them himself. Orion seriously thinks for a moment and admits that this is definitely the fastest way to get what he needs, but adds that without the guild's permission they won't even let him into the dungeon, and the receptionist waves her hand and asks not to take her sarcasm so seriously. She says that this pass system was invented so that reckless people like him with a low rank would not just walk into the arms of death, and while she laughs at this, Alice in the background looks genuinely offended for Orion. Alice suddenly grabbed Orion by the sleeve and pulled him. Orion looked down and asked her what had happened. Alice told him that this was the perfect moment to officially register their teacher-student relationship to prove he was worthy of it. As soon as she said this, a loud announcement sounded from the opposite end of the room, instantly capturing their attention. A tall traveler with a stick in his hand approaches them and asks if he is Orion, the very one who supposedly led Alice by the nose all this time. The man calls himself a Jaya person, looks at Orion condescendingly, and constantly boasts that he is an adventurer of the beer rank. Jai poked with his finger and said, to call what Orion is doing simply a deception is an understatement. Right there in the hall, he decided to make an extraordinarily bold statement. He mocks Orion's rank, saying that a coward like him would instantly turn to a coal the moment he stepped into a high-level zone, say, a cave of scorching heat. Alice stands nearby, puffed her cheeks in pure fury at such contempt. Elise cannot stand it and exclaims that her master would easily destroy the dragon with one shot, imagining how Orion effortlessly deals with the monster, Orion. Ren cannot help but feel that he is beginning to expect too much from him. Jai stages a scene, shouting that all this is ridiculous and absurd. At the neighboring table, Orion watches the outburst of anger and thinks that Jai simply cannot understand why the brilliant sorceress Alice decided to be his apprentice. Jai does not calm down, becoming more aggressive, looks at Alice condescendingly and says he cannot stand people who pretend to be important without any talent. Alice finally can't stand it, abruptly interrupts him and shouts that she herself asked to be Orion's student because she really likes him, and demands that Jai be quiet and not talk about a man he doesn't even know. Jai just looks at her with a cold, irritated gaze as if her words mean nothing to him. He does not take her seriously at all. She hadn't even managed to say a word when Jai suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed Alice by the elbow. His movement completely stunned her, and she screamed in fear as he held her tightly. Jai sharply pulls her along and insists that she leave Orion and become his apprentice. To make an impression, he begins to boast that he is a master of 3 schools of magic. He continues to pull her, insisting that they need to find a place to talk and boast about his magical knowledge, but Alice breaks free from his grip, says she is in pain, and demands to be released immediately. Just as Jai thought he would get away with it, a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder, pressing so hard that he froze. Orion stepped forward and physically stopped Jai, not letting him pass, standing between them with a grim look and finally losing patience because of the behavior of a level B adventurer. Jai turns around, looking terribly offended, as if he were some nobody without a rank. No one would dare touch him. He looks threateningly at Orion and asks, "How do you imagine what you are doing?" Orion looks Jai straight in the eyes and coldly says that Alice clearly hates it, adding that Jai should have stopped being so persistent long ago. Jai only smiles confidently, completely unmoved, mockingly asking if some nobody without rank is really trying to provoke him. Orion does not flinch, looks intently into Jai's eyes and says, if this continues, he is ready to go further. Jai is clearly irritated, scratching his head because Orion is bothering him, and arrogantly, with a contemptuous smile, looks at him, warning the rankless boy not to underestimate him. Orion officially challenges him and announces a duel. Raising a finger, he grimly promises to thoroughly beat Jai in front of everyone so that he finally regrets his action. Approaching the counter, Orion left the girl at the reception in complete shock. He said that it was so, and asked her to take care of the papers for the duel. The receptionist looks at him anxiously, not believing her eyes, and asks if he really intends to fight the adventurer Birank. She tries to reach him, saying that the gap in power between him and Jai is huge, warning he will be instantly torn to pieces, while Jai stands nearby and smiles proudly. Alice stands all anxious about all this, and raising her eyes to Orion, it is clear how sincerely she cares about her master. Orion extends his hand and gently, soothingly strokes Alice's head. He decisively tells her that in such circumstances retreat is not an option for him. Jai looks down with a self-satisfied smile as they step into the center of the guild arena, standing opposite each other, ready to settle everything before the crowd, and Alice raises her gaze to Orion with a determined expression and tells her master that he absolutely must win this duel. Orion stroked Alice's head again and smiled. I simply cannot afford to lose her. Watching them from afar, Jai mutters irritably under his breath. Giza's face darkened with anger. He looked at them and sharply ordered them to stop showing off right in front of him. Finally, the signal sounds and the match officially begins. Jai clenches his staff, challenges Orion. Now he is going to show the great gap between their powers. He starts a spell and calls Orion to become the support of his flame. Jai shouted to Orion, "Die," and released a huge fireball that whistled across the arena. Orion does not retreat and carefully watches the attack flying at him. It is insanely fast, the mana is orange, and the spell is much more chaotic than Alice's magic. Orion raised his hand and whispered barely audibly protection to deflect the spell. He instantly realized that Jai did not spend much mana, so the power was weak and the entire attack. This clearly does not reach Alice's level. The entire crowd froze, eyes wide open, gazes fixed on the arena. Jai seemed to have seen a ghost, sweating profusely, staring at Orion. He tries to hold on to a strained, trembling smile, but it is clear he was completely shaken. He asks Orion what kind of trick that was, what he just pulled off. Jai points his finger and starts shouting, trying to gather himself again, insisting that Orion has no rank only because he is too pathetic to handle even simple spells. Orion just stands behind the barrier with a blank expression, and Jai gets even angrier. He asks why he uses magic as if it is nothing, and tells him to stop being arrogant. Orion smiles boldly and indifferently and says that he still hasn't learned magic through singing, and Jai loses his mind over this and shouts for Orion to stop joking with him. Jai will no longer tolerate disrespect and says that Orion's offensive words end here, and now he leans forward, ready to give everything he has in one last decisive move. 3 giant magical circles flared around Jai as he began a powerful spell. He summoned fire spirits and commanded them to transform into hellish flames to incinerate the enemy. With a mad gleam in his eyes, Jai exclaimed that he would finally show his most powerful spell. Jai shouted the name of his spell, Flare, and a huge ball of fire rushed straight at Orion, but Orion didn't even blink and quietly whispered the word protection. Here they are, those who watch from the sidelines. They are completely terrified and in total shock, watching as this immense power spreads around. Orion does not retreat and holds his position as a giant wall of fire crashes onto his barrier. Alice stands aside, completely stunned by how easily he withstands this powerful blow. The smoke begins to dissipate and Jai silently watches. The barrier is still strong, though a few cracks remain from the impact. Jai is nearly sweating profusely, with wide-open and trembling eyes staring at that magic. He cannot believe his eyes and realizes that Orion must have cast several spells simultaneously. Jai mentally tells himself that for such protective magic, usually the spell has to be cast at least twice, and several layers of reinforcement are a completely different matter. Behind the wall, Orion is completely relaxed and confident that 2 layers of his protection are more than enough. Jace has simply lost his mind. He pokes Orion with his finger and shouts that he is a new kind of cheater who fakes his rank, while Orion just stands with crossed arms and tells Jace that he probably better go home. Orion remains calm and explains that, unfortunately for Jai, he really has no rank, and if that annoys him, he can go complain to the guild. Jai screams desperately as the pressure of the fight finally breaks his staff in half. Even with broken weapons, Jace does not retreat. He tightly grips the fragments and shouts that he is a B-rank traveler, so Orion should not even dare to look down on him. Jai rushed forward, waving the broken halves of the staff like sticks. Orion just stood with a blank stare and watched as a desperate attack approached him. With a wild spark in his eyes, Jai says he will wipe that confident smile away. Right from Orion, he begins to cast again, summoning fire spirits to charge his strike. Orion raised his eyes. Bright mana spheres swirled around him. He instantly realized that engaging in hand-to-hand combat was a bad idea, but he had a plan, so he called Emerald Mana to prepare, and Jai was not going to let him go. He rushed forward, shouting that he would not let Orion escape, and as he approached, he began casting a fire spell to strike. Orion focuses all his attention on the mana spheres and with a single simple command orders the energy to carry him. The ground shakes as the spell begins to take effect. Even before Jace could strike, Orion suddenly shot sharply upward. Jace froze, staring at the empty space where Orion had just stood, completely bewildered. Jai lifts his head and sees that Orion's boots are hanging right above him. He completely loses his mind and screams he can't believe that someone is really flying. Alice stepped aside and watches. She is just as stunned with amazement as everyone else. She can't comprehend whether this is really the magic of flight, because such a spell could not exist in our world today. Still high above the ground, Orion again reaches out to the glowing spheres. This time he calls upon the crimson mana to embody his will. Orion looked down at Jace and commanded the mana to flare up. A huge fiery explosion burst from the sky and hit the ground exactly where Jace stood. Jai just watches in horror as the flames engulf him. He is completely stunned and cannot grasp the power that is coming upon him. Smoke and steam begin to disperse, and Orion, looking from above, knows, because he is fighting a high-ranking mage alone. Even one powerful explosion is unlikely to stop this fight. Orion is focused, looking ready to see the matter through to the end. He tells himself that it is time to see what will happen next. Jai is clearly under pressure. Sweat breaks through his nervous smile, and he shouts at Orion, demanding to show how he intends to act after the last attack. But even before Orion manages to move, Gaius's staff strikes the ground. He feels that this is beyond his strength and begins to call a timeout. Jai raises his hands in complete surrender, laughs at himself for getting into this mess, loudly admits that he was wrong, and officially surrenders the fight. The announcer froze for a moment in shock, but then finally declared the result. He shouted to the crowd that Orion had won. Alice did not hesitate and rushed to Orion, shining with excitement, exclaiming that he is incredible and looks insanely cool there. She does not calm down. With admiration, she exclaims that she has never seen anyone master such precise magic and fly like that, and is sure that he is the best mage in the world. In the background, Jai is still on his knees and looks completely exhausted. Orion just shrugged and walked away, saying he expected this from the very beginning. Elise smiles to herself, recalling how it happened that she discovered her hidden power although she did not plan it. She says she does not regret it at all. Alice says that everyone in the arena is still talking about him, but Orion is not thrilled with this fame. He looks very tired of this attention and simply asks her to forget about it. Guild receptionist stands stunned and cannot understand how someone without an official rank managed to defeat such a veteran as Jai. She's terribly ashamed of how she behaved with Orion earlier. She bows low over the counter, and with sincere shame says that her professional eye did not notice his true potential after so many years of watching travelers come and go. But Orion does not hold a grudge. He quietly smiles, tells her don't worry, and explains that it is easy to get confused because so many people use expensive equipment or catalysts to hide the lack of real skill. His response hit her right in the heart. She looks at him with a bright blush, completely touched by his generosity and willingness to forgive. The receptionist decides to share a secret and whispers that they had minor problems with the supply of red dragon scales, and while she speaks, Elise noticeably gets annoyed and mutters that she suddenly behaves too friendly with Orion. It turned out that the entire shortage was because of Daniel and the hero party. They took on a quest to hunt a fire dragon but got stuck and still have not succeeded. Learning that the cause of the problem was the hero team, Orion leaned back and groaned dully from irritation, and Alice looked no less angry, realizing that it was Daniel who was holding everything back. Orion decided that waiting any longer was impossible. He returns to Alice and calmly asks if they should go together and take down the dragon on their own if the heroes can't handle it. Alice did not expect such a proposal at all and exclaimed in shock, "Are you really serious? The two of us are going to hunt the dragon." She tells him that it sounds like a real death mission. Even the receptionist feels it and agrees, saying that although she knows he is strong, facing a dragon is a completely different level of madness. Orion tries to downplay the danger, saying that with fire dragons it's actually simple, their weak spots are too obvious, and someone like Alice should handle it without problems. Alice just stands. She looks at him with an expression of pure disbelief and asks if he is really serious, and Orion does not back down and insists that if he defeats the dragon himself, then maybe he will finally agree to take her as an apprentice, but immediately waved it off, laughed, called it a joke, and teased whether she was going to back out of everything out of fear because she is too scared to see it through. Instead of retreating, Alice has a strange look and she says that she finally understands what is going on. Orion remains a bit puzzled by her sudden change of tone. Alice is wildly inspired and announces that hunting the dragon is her final trial to become his apprentice, and Orion only awkwardly makes a sound, realizing that his plan to scare her completely failed. Orion starts sweating, looking at her determined expression. He can't believe she is really excited about this deadly mission. Alice is now completely resolute. She shouts that she is ready to go and calls him master. Orion tries to hold her back, but the girls at the guild counter are already drawn into the drama. One started crying and says he is like a lion pushing a lion cub off a cliff, and another immediately rushed to arrange the hunting permit. Orion stands with his face in his hands, completely exhausted by how quickly everything escalated. Behind him, Alice is on cloud 9, proudly raising her new pass and promising the master that she will work with all her might. And elsewhere, the mood is much heavier. Daniel addresses his group and insists that today they will definitely clear the dungeon no matter the cost. Luna and another girl at the party look completely exhausted and drained. Luna asks if they really are going there again. Daniel is not worried and decisively tells her that they have no other choice. Daniel is clearly under pressure, tightly clutching the magic stone and muttering to himself that their team must prove as soon as possible they can handle the dungeons without Orion, and he resolutely wants to show his master that they manage perfectly on their own. Deep in the cave of scorching heat, Alice feels every degree, complains about the incredible heat, and Orion just indifferently agrees as they go deeper through the stone tunnels. Orion decides to do something about the heat. He notices blue mana swirling around, points at it, and commands the energy to spin around them. The effect is instant, and Alice is completely frozen with surprise. She is shocked but happy, and says that the cave suddenly became incredibly cool. Orion pretends nothing is wrong. He says that if they stayed in such a fervor, they would get tired and burn out before finishing the work. But Alice is not fooled by his calm. She sharply tells him to stop pretending it is easy and demands an explanation of the real logic behind such a step. Orion only smiled a little, waved his hand, and said he would explain how it works another time. Suddenly, Orion seems to freeze, awkwardly waving his hands, not understanding why he involuntarily thinks that Alice will now stay forever nearby, and Alice has no idea why he is panicking and just looks at him puzzled. Going further down, they walk down, and Alice smiled. They are already on the 3rd floor, and everything turned out to be much easier than expected. Alice resorts to her magic to help with reconnaissance. She whispered a spell called the Spirits of the Wind and sent a light breeze ahead to search the area. As soon as the spell worked, Alice looked back and gave a sign that everything is clear. She says that no monsters are nearby, so for now it is safe for them to move. Orion asks Alice about the magic with which she just scanned the surroundings, and she proudly says that it is called Compressed Incantation Arrow Blaster, the perfect tool to find where monsters are hiding. Orion repeats this name to himself, noticeably stunned. It was clear that he had heard of such a trick but did not expect to see it with his own eyes. Suddenly he wanted to understand how it works, and Alice, noticing his confusion, prepares to explain the entire magical theory in detail. Usually, to cast a spell, a mage must precisely imagine the desired effect and flawlessly pronounce every word of the incantation. A compressed incantation is an advanced method that allows skipping all these rituals and significantly shortening the process. Orion scratched his head and honestly admitted that he knew little about modern magic, but still told Alice that it was an incredible skill, and she laughed joyfully. Alice was not in the mood and told Orion that they needed to move on, calling him her lord. Orion just smiled and agreed it was time to descend deeper into the cave. While they were walking, Orion could not get out of his head how impressive Alice's magic was and decided, if she showed him something so cool, he would repay her with his skills. As they made their way through dark stone tunnels, Orion activated his special sight, instantly scanned the surroundings, and mentally ordered to clear the path ahead. He eagerly wished to get to the next level of the dungeon as soon as possible, but when he looked back, suddenly something completely unexpected caught his attention. A stern expression appeared on Orion's face. He froze and whispered to Alice. His search had revealed something. It turned out they were not alone, because on this floor, someone else was with them. Alice shockingly asks Orion if his abilities really allow him to see so many details, and Orion calmly confirms, adding that it is not just about human vision looking ahead. He notices a real danger. Deep around the group swirls a huge swarm of monsters, so many that counting is pointless. Alice still does not believe that he can catch all that information, but Orion is not worried at all and gently reassures her. As long as she is beside him, everything will be fine. Orion froze, pondering, and asks her if it is really worth deliberately throwing themselves into such trouble, and Alice looks at him, trying to understand his anxiety. Alice gathered all her courage and decisively told Orion that they need to move forward, clearly making it understood that she could at least take care of herself while they were there. Orion just smiles, looks at her confidence, and says that he does not intend to be a burden or hold her back. Orion says he understands, and they both go deeper, and suddenly the story throws us back about 30 minutes on the same floor. Daniel shouts that they are already on the 3rd floor, and although he looks a bit broken, he boasts that so far everything has been very easy. Luna sighs for a long time. His behavior clearly irritates her, and she warns him not to be so confident because they are entering unfamiliar territory that they have not explored before. Daniel asks her to stop grumbling like that. He laughs, waving his hand, and says that their short progress only proves that a loser like Orion was never needed by them anyway. Daniel, in euphoria, shouts loudly that today they will pass the dungeon and destroy the fire dragon. And Luna looks at him and does not understand such optimism. She believes that they ended up here the first time only because Orion was here before them, and already realizes that they have almost used up all the recovery means. And relying on magical items without a real mage is already on the edge, when suddenly she hears a noise and realizes that something is approaching. A giant stone monster rumbles overhead, and Luna shouts to the group, "Careful," as the creature appears. Luna activates the protective spell ground field, which unfolds and covers the group, and behind the barrier Emily draws the bowstring and looks very anxious. Luna barely holds the defense and says that fighting such a monster is a real horror. The golem lets out a mighty roar that shakes the entire vicinity. Luna howled at Daniel, angry that he was rushing forward alone again. Daniel ignores her and throws himself directly at the huge stone golem with a sword. The monster hit Daniel so hard that he cried out, completely stunned by its strength. Daniel groans on the floor. He says it hurts and wonders what happened. He has not yet noticed that his foot accidentally pressed a hidden mechanical switch in the floor. Daniel lifts his head all sweaty when suddenly a huge shadow falls over the group. A rumble begins and everyone freezes in complete shock, watching what is happening. Daniel tries his best to justify himself, shouting that what is happening is not his fault. Luna points at him and shouts that she doesn't care who is to blame. He just let this do something and everything will fix itself. Daniel and Luna were in a miserable state after the golem attack, but before they could recover and gather themselves, Emily ordered them to wait. Something told her that something was wrong, and at that moment a loud roar echoed through the cave, and the group realized all the noise they made was attracting all the monsters from the surroundings straight to them. Daniel looks at the path ahead and cannot believe his eyes. Is this some sick joke? He asks, as a huge army of goblins and lizardmen stands before them, reinforced by a giant stone golem. The pressure is already too strong. Luna looks away, appearing completely exhausted and broken, and Daniel begins to suffocate. He trembles, all sweaty, completely paralyzed by fear. Daniel finally can't take it and falls to his knees, weakly begging for someone to come to their aid. He starts shouting about a savior, but Emily she just looks at him with eyes full of despair because she knows no one will come. Emily closes her eyes and wonders if this grim scene is really the end of their journey. she begins to think that maybe this is just the natural consequence of everything they have done. At the darkest moment she thinks about Orion, she imagines his smiling face, remembers how he always reached out to help, and wonders what he is doing now. Guilt hits her with full force. She suddenly realizes that all along she relied only on Orion's strength and at the most important moment did nothing to help him. Lizard men and goblins rush forward to finish them off. As the monsters approach, Emily desperately begins to beg for a miracle. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes and one last thought remained in her mind. She wants to get out of here alive, but more than anything she wants to get a chance. Find Orion and sincerely tell him how sorry she is. When the monsters were about to attack, a huge wave of magic covered the place. A voice ordered to repel the enemies, and a powerful explosion instantly cleared the entire path. Daniel froze as if he saw a ghost. Right beneath him, Emily's eyes opened wide. She looked at the place where the monsters had just stood. Alice stepped into the gap, praising her master and saying she knew he would definitely find someone, and Orion followed with a sigh, simply glad they managed to help in time. Daniel can't believe his eyes and shouts Orion's name, while Orion remains calm and indifferently says that his trick only works on weak low-level monsters, and Alice looks at him a bit surprised, probably thinking that those monsters were by no means weak. Emily is overwhelmed with emotions. She tries to say something but trembles so much that she utters only one word. Tears roll down her cheeks as she looks at him. She feels as if this is a dream. She cannot believe everything turned out so perfectly. Orion glances at the group and Daniel is still sitting on the ground as if in shock. Finally, he comes to his senses and realizes that the one who just saved their lives is the same person they drove away. Orion approaches and, seeing her sobbing, asks Emily what happened. She is completely broken, whispering through tears that she really thought she would never see him again. Orion looks at her and suddenly realizes how bad everything was. He sees that they were driven to the very edge. Seeing the state they are in, Ryan anxiously asks if everything is all right and offers to remove the lid and pull them all to the surface. They clearly cannot go any further. The tension in the cave is so oppressive that Alice, Orion, and Emily look at Daniel as if he has lost his mind, and he painfully clenches his fist and growls that he is not joking about their situation. Although he himself was beaten and saved by that guy he drove away, Daniel starts shouting and swinging his sword, insisting that they will not give up and will move forward to kill the dragon as planned. Emily is still broken. Tears flow down her face. She looks at him distrustfully and asks, "Are you serious? After we almost died?" Orion and Alice are silent. They look at Daniel as if their gazes pierce him. He feels the pressure and lets out an irritated groan, knowing he is cornered. Daniel begins to tremble. His finger shakes as he points at Orion. It is clear he is trying to regain control of the situation and decides to address Orion directly. With a sinister, desperate smile, Daniel tells Orion that he grants him the honor to rejoin their company, and Orion just stands with a blank look as if he doesn't care. The cave froze for a second, and the only reaction was an awkward sound of disbelief at the audacity of this offer. Daniel presses even harder, raises his thumb, and again insists that by allowing Orion to return to him, he is doing him a huge favor. Luna and Emily are simply stunned, unable to believe that Daniel can really be so insanely confident. Orion is not at all excited. He indifferently scratches his ear as if bored, and looks around as if trying to understand who Daniel is talking to. Daniel continues to act as if Orion has returned because he finally realized Daniel's magic is too valuable to let Orion go. Orion decisively interrupts him and immediately says that this is not true at all. Daniel looks completely out of sorts. Sweat is dripping, his body is trembling. He tries to play the hero and says he is letting Orion back and supposedly out of pity for his former comrade. But Orion doesn't buy it and asks with obvious boredom if he is seriously still dragging this nonsense, which completely throws Daniel off balance and makes him even more pathetic. At that moment, Alice steps forward. She is simply furious, standing with her hands on her hips as if she is about to tear Daniel apart for his lies. Alice can't hold back, points her finger directly at Daniel and calls him a true hypocrite. She shouts that he was the one who drove out his mentor and abandoned him, calls his current offer pure selfishness, and directly tells him that he should learn shame for acting as if he is doing a favor. The news hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She froze, eyes wide open, trying to comprehend that she had been lied to all this time. Finally, Emily finds her voice and asks everyone to wait. She looks completely shattered and asks if Daniel really kicked Orion out of the party. Luna is not thrilled either. She steps forward and looks at him with a fierce gaze, demanding that Daniel explain himself and say directly what is going on, while he, cornered, starts sweating profusely. Daniel begins to panic and barely utters anything. He stammers and invents lies to cover his tracks, but it is clear that he is failing. The girls won't let him off so easily. Emily recalls what he told her Orion left the party on his own, and Luna demands that he speak up and is outraged that he hid such an important thing from the rest of the team. Cornered, Daniel finally loses his composure and starts shouting. He asks them to stop doubting his judgment and insists that the end result would have been the same no matter what he did. No matter what he did. Alice turns away, genuine disgust on her face. She tells Daniel that he is absolutely the worst for everything he has done. Luna laughs at how pathetic he looks, all sweaty, and amid this tension, a word finally escapes from Emily. She utters Orion's name. Orion smiled warmly at Emily and, trying to calm her, said not to worry. He is fine, he can handle it himself. Emily sighed with relief and smiled, saying she was glad to hear he was okay though there was chaos around. She was truly happy that he was well. Alice no longer wanted to stay here, decisively pointed out their path and told Orion it was time to go. Orion agreed and prepared to set off. Before leaving, Orion releases the last spark of magic towards his old comrades and asks them not to strain themselves, so they return home safe and without unnecessary risk. Luna, stretched, filled with the energy of the spell, joyfully said that Orion's supportive magic was the best, and felt as if wings had grown on her because her body became incredibly light. Orion and Alice headed into the forest thicket while the rest of the company froze and watched them leave. Emily shouted a final "thank you" so he would understand then he really saved them. Emily stands and looks at his back with bitter sadness. She thinks about how much she wanted them to continue traveling together as a team. They part ways and she looks completely broken and upset, realizing there was still so much she wanted to discuss. They were supposed to talk to him about it, but now the chance is lost. Emily watches as Orion walks away, looking as if he is about to break down. She understands that after everything that happened, she cannot ask him to stay. Meanwhile, Orion and Alice resolutely move through the dungeon. They easily pass the floors and eventually overcome all 7 without any effort. Finally, they reach the end and found themselves before huge, lavishly decorated doors. Orion tells Alice that it is time to move, and she looks at him and asks if he is really ready for this. Orion remains calm and looks straight ahead, and Alice addresses him as master and, more determined than ever, says, "Just watch how I handle this." They step into the final hall in the deepest part of the dungeon, and immediately the ground trembles as a huge foot strikes right in front of them. It turned out that their main boss was a fire dragon, a huge monster with dark scales which looked much more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The dragon opened its jaws and let out a roar that echoed throughout the hall, trying to scare them both. The pressure from the dragon's roar was simply insane. Alice had to hold on tightly so she wouldn't be thrown back. Orion quietly tells Alice if it gets too hard for her, he will cover her, but she, tense, firmly refuses. She will not let him intervene under any circumstances. He stubbornly insists that she is not at all F. She decisively says all right and orders him to stay away. She will handle this dragon herself. Orion listened to her, handed over the teleportation crystal, and said to use it immediately if it becomes dangerous. He also asked if she needed magical support or any items before starting, but Alice, embarrassed, assured him she could manage on her own, thanked him for the cover, and explained that her pride was at stake. After all, under his gaze, she could not afford to look pathetic or weak. She looks him straight in the eyes and makes him promise, no matter what happens during the fight, he will not intervene. Orion simply gives up and says he understands, takes a seat, and watches how she manages, because finally everything is getting serious. Alice opens her grimoire and begins a heavy spell, summoning an ancient flame that could end the world. A bright magical circle shone over the pages of the book. Orion, with wide-open eyes, watches the mana move vividly and suddenly realizes, for the first time in his life, he is seeing a spell of such power with his own eyes. Under Alice's feet, a huge, intricate magical circle unfolds. She puts all her strength into it, and the tension of the mana is already visible on her face. A blazing dragon looms over her, but Alice does not retreat. The flames of her spell begin to rage around the enormous beast as she prepares to unleash it. Here it is, the legendary spell Quadra. This is a level of magic most people never see, and Alice creates it right in the middle of the boss's room. The dragon tenses, the air fills with heat. Alice is now fully committed, and the entire upper chamber of the dungeon is about to feel the full weight of her power. Orion freezes in shock. He watches as Alice controls the mana and cannot comprehend how she can so easily make it dense. Like a living creature, he sweats a little, having completely underestimated spell magic and never imagined it could reach such a level. Alice looks back at him holding a spellbook entwined with twisted tongues of flame and proudly asks what he thinks about it, saying that this is her own spell which she created herself. She smiles from ear to ear and tells him that this magic is incredibly beautiful to her. The fire dragon lets out a powerful roar, feeling the pressure the spell around it grows stronger with every second. The tension is already pressing on Alice and she shouts a command to renew the spell. The magic circle flares as she forces the mana to hold its shape, resisting the dragon. It is clear that she is exhausted and breathing heavily, but she does not give up, shouting that she can still go further. Standing behind her, Orion sinks into memories of all the spells Alice has shown him since they met. He has always seen her previous spells as flawless works of art, restrained and exquisite. This magic is different. It is rough and wild, as if it pours all its true life force into it. Press the power into the spell for it to work. Orion looks at Alice from behind and thinks to himself, in her place I would just wait for the right moment to strike, not rush straight at the monster. He understands that is exactly why Alice is so impressive. He is truly ready to go head-on against the dragon that relies only on its magic. Alice tries to maintain the healing spell, but the tension finally makes itself known. She lets out a painful groan as her strength begins to leave her. Orion shouts at her not to overdo it, but Alice is stubborn and insists that she can still fight. At that moment, the fire dragon roared deafeningly and began to gather power for a huge blazing breath. Alice froze completely, staring at the glow, and Orion realized that now things were really bad. The dragon fires a super powerful beam of scorching heat. A huge explosion rushes straight at them. Alice looks unable to believe her eyes, shocked that they are still standing as the heat from the explosion subsides. Orion reaches out and grabs her by the shoulder to get her attention, apologizing and preparing to take everything into his own hands. Alice calls him her master, and Orion meanwhile takes a step. He steps into the light, finally ready to handle the dragon himself. Orion stepped forward, his face like stone, preparing to take the blow. Alice was right behind him, as if about to explode with excitement at what he was doing, and he sees the energy rushing at them like crimson mana, and despite the danger remains calm. And at that moment the fire dragon opens its jaws and releases a huge, dazzling beam of fire straight at them. Alice screams at him in panic for help. The attack is approaching, and Orion hasn't even flinched. When the dragon's breath looms over them, Orion quickly assesses the situation and realizes that the attack is just a manipulation of mana, so he can tame it himself. He reaches out to the blood-red glowing mana, ready to test his theory. Alice is still hysterical in the background, shouting at him that it will never work and begging him to stop. Orion dismisses doubts and puts all his strength into it, shouting for the energy to just sweep everything away. And it really worked. The giant fiery beam completely deflected, bent aside, and passed by without touching them. The entire area was illuminated by a powerful flash from the redirected explosion, and Orion just stands as if nothing happened while Alice pressed against him, trembled in complete shock. The mighty explosion of the dragon's breath strikes the wall with a deafening roar, sending shockwaves throughout the hall. The fire dragon froze, its own power turned against it. Alice loses her mind, crouches and covers her ears, hiding from the blow, while Orion remains calm, casually lowering his hand after performing the impossible redirection. When the noise subsides, Alice raised her wide-open eyes to him, completely puzzled. She asked what he had just done. She barely utters a sentence, only stammering, while Orion looks with an empty, dry gaze as if already tired of explaining something. Orion looks at the charred strip after the explosion and calls it the breath of a dragon, or at least its cheap imitation. Alice panics even more and loudly exclaims that he really knows how to use the monster's signature move, but Orion just turns away, scratches his head, and says he learned to do it only a minute ago. Alice tells him that his magic has never been clear to her, and what he just did is completely beyond her understanding, and Orion tries to restrain and focus them, saying he will explain everything in detail later if they even get out. He tells her that the most important thing now is to destroy the dragon once and for all. Alice just looks at him distrustfully, as if her brain just short-circuited. Smoke disperses and a fiery dragon appears. Alive, angrier than ever, it lets out a deafening roar. Alice looks at the monster and asks what they should do now if such a strike didn't help. Orion does not answer, just stand. Looking the monster straight in the eyes, the real battle is about to begin. Orion looks the dragon straight in the eyes, focused, and decides that it's time to finally try something new. He extends his hand, and a mana sphere ignites in the air casually. Looking at the surrounding mana flows, he says they are probably bitter that they are used so much. Orion stands in a field of light, addresses the mana, and says he will prove that Alice's magic is really strong enough to bring down the dragon. he summons blood-red mana and spheres begin to swirl around him. The fiery dragon raises its head and sees a colossal accumulation of energy gathering right above it. Alice is frozen, overwhelmed by shock. The magic Orion is gathering is actually her own move. When a gigantic burning bird emerges from the material in the flames, Orion admits his version is just a cheap imitation of Alice's magic, and his imitation in no way matches the beauty of her true spell. Even if it is just a copy, Orion burns with determination when he says that this is quite enough to repay that monster. Orion commanded the magic to go and finish off the dragon once and for all, sending a huge fiery bird that rushed straight at the beast. Alice is stunned, exclaims that the power is on a completely different level, although it is the same spell she uses, and suddenly realizes she finally sees the true power of her teacher. Moving on, Orion looked at the strike and told Alice that she was mistaken. He admitted that he himself could never have summoned that magic. It all succeeded only because she was nearby. Orion watches as his copy of Alice's spell hits the target, sees that her magic definitely reached the dragon, and feels confident while the energy swirls around, but recalling everything he studied, he understands. By the usual laws of magic, such power is generally impossible. Orion thought, what a crazy trick, whoever manages to pull it off will immediately become a living legend. At that very moment, the energy reached its peak, and a huge pillar of light burst upward, a sign of the awakening of the lost spell, which completely engulfed the entire area. Later in the village, a rumor spread that the dungeon was cleared, and everyone was already preparing to celebrate the fire dragon was finally defeated. Orion and Alice went into the local tavern to rest. Alice, full of joy, loudly shouted a toast, and their mugs clanged loudly in honor of the great victory. Alice is still thrilled after the battle, glowing with happiness and excitedly telling about the huge pile of loot and materials they got from the dragon's body. Orion asks if these materials can enhance her magic. He adds that he is actually looking forward to what she will come up with for the next project, and she gladly agrees. Switching to another topic, Alice says that the one who was sitting at the guild reception did not expect this at all, and asks Orion if he has come before to see how things are going there. At first, the guild receptionist did not take them seriously and laughed at the idea that they really killed a dragon, but she instantly became confused. She almost went crazy when she realized that the materials they brought were real. Returning to the guild, the receptionist completely loses her head over the dragon material, stumbling over her words and asking Orion to wait a minute while she tries to sort everything out, and Orion just watches and thinks that her reaction is too exaggerated for some monster parts. Later in the tavern, the owner brings out a huge feast, serves curry for as many as 3 people, and Alice, all flushed, awkwardly says that she is about to eat 2 full plates right in front of her master. Orion calmly says that she doesn't even need to worry, her secret identity is already revealed, so there is no point in pretending to be a refined lady. Alice can't stand it, hisses, "Shut up," and powerfully kicks him under the table. The tavern owner just stands and laughs at both of them. Alice frowns again, stuffing curry into her mouth, and Orion sits down, a bit stunned by the sudden kick to his leg. The tavern owner notices how happy Alice is and asks if Orion has finally agreed and accepted her as his official apprentice. Alice is silent, but it is clear she is in a great mood, humming under her breath and enjoying her food contentedly. Alice laughs and explains that she has not yet become his official apprentice, but she is very pleased he came out of the dungeon with a huge pile of materials, and Orion adds that the loot was really worth the effort. The innkeeper looked at Orion and asked why he was so indecisive. "You hat's the problem with taking the sincere girl Alice as an apprentice?" Orion just smiled and said that he actually has nothing against her. The tavern owner says that Orion probably just needs to agree after all. How strange it looks when a famous adventurer begs a stranger without rank to teach her, so he advises Orion to put an end to this strange situation himself and just say yes. The tavern owner laughed loudly, clearly enjoying the spectacle, and threw in that in the end, such matters as apprenticeship are simply about what a person wants. He continues, after so many years in this business, he has learned to read people well. He is confident that he can see something special is being born between them. Orion kept eating and said that the very fact of his concern about whether he was a good enough teacher already proves he is truly a decent person. Sitting in the tavern, he thought about how the world is full of vile people who live trying to deceive others and take their hard-earned money. He looked at Alice and said directly that he could vouch for her, she can be trusted. Orion quietly smiles to himself, wondering in his thoughts if everything between them is really just like that. Suddenly Alice screamed at him in panic, "Don't be so trusting." She starts yelling at the innkeeper, calls Orion a complete fool, and reminds him how he almost signed as a guarantor, nearly sold his life for some very suspicious credit papers just a few days ago. She just exploded, shouting about what he would have gotten into if she hadn't intervened and stopped him from such a huge mistake. But then she calms down and smiles a little, admitting that although he is a bit hopeless, the innkeeper was right, he is a good person. Orion just scratches his head and looks very awkward. She is airing his dirty laundry so openly. Alice finally calls him a master and says that adventurer ranks are just a formality. He is confident very soon everyone will understand how truly wonderful he really is. Orion looked down and, thinking about how the world is arranged, realized that human views, common sense, and the weight of authority will not change because of one event, and further pondered that people by nature fear what they do not understand, so their first instinctive reaction is usually to push away or get rid of the unknown. While Orion was deep in thought, Alice suddenly jumped up. A brilliant idea came to her mind, and she called him. A clear determination flashed in her eyes, and she suggests, for the next mission, to go to a mountain cave and track the ice dragon. Orion simply froze at this proposal. He cannot believe his ears. Alice, it seems, does not notice his shock at all and calmly says that she finally understood her weakness in that last fight and promises to win next time. She declares that she will manage on her own so that he does not even lift a finger, but Orion immediately interrupts her. He will not allow her such recklessness. Orion held his breath in surprise. He really thought that the meeting with the orc leader would traumatize her, but it turned out that she is incredibly energetic and already wants more. He sees the fire flare up in her and understands, if left alone, she would really be crazy enough to go challenge the dragon herself. To change the subject and bring the conversation back to reality, Orion lowers his gaze to the table. He begins to ask her about the whole story with the master. Orion looked at Alice and finally dared ask if she wanted to officially form a team with him. Alice does not hesitate for a second, stands up and exclaims that she definitely agrees, but Orion immediately raises a finger to stop her and says there is one, but. He began to lecture her, saying that from now on reckless solo dragon hunts are strictly forbidden, and made it clear, if she takes on something so big they will do it together, as a team. When the conversation dies down, the innkeeper approaches their table with the Sunday newspaper in his hands, notices the worry on Alice's face and asks what happened. Alice tells him that Orion behaves like an overly protective master, but the tavern owner just laughs and says that they really look like the perfect pair, master and apprentice. Orion crosses his arms over his chest and turns away, a little annoyed by the comparison, saying that he is just behaving normally after all. Anyone would worry if an acquaintance could get hurt. Noticing the chance, Alice lights up with hope and asks if he simply admits it and officially accepts her as an apprentice, but Orion, without hesitation, replies that it is a completely different matter. Alice quietly sighs in disappointment. She was not accepted as an apprentice again. Looking at the empty plates on the table, Orion ponders a little. How strange everything turned out after he was expelled from the former party. He was sure he would remain a lonely adventurer forever. He suddenly realizes that he never imagined he would see this day, and even more so did not expect it to happen so soon. When he even felt that the idea of going to a party again suited him perfectly. Alice waved goodbye to Orion and shouted, "See you tomorrow." Orion looked back with a barely noticeable smile and confirmed that they would meet in the workshop. Later, boots quietly and rhythmically clicked. Someone was sneaking through this area. Turns out Luna is sneaking nearby, hiding behind the trees and watching the two with a worried expression on her face. A few hours ago, Luna stood at the entrance to the cave, completely confused and not knowing what to do. Nearby, Daniel's impatience could be heard as he shouted at Orion. Daniel simply explodes over the rumors that Orion is a high-ranking mage, shouting that it is complete nonsense, insisting that Orion is just someone who dropped out of training and has no rank and cannot be otherwise. He is truly talented. Daniel smiles ominously and tells Luna that today he is meeting someone to put an end to rumors and show everyone the truth, while Luna just looks at him as if she doesn't believe he can be so petty. Luna sighed deeply, wondering inwardly how pathetic it was that Daniel held such a deep grudge over trivial matters. In the forest, Julia looks around and loudly calls out, "Where is my older sister Alice?" Daniel approaches the girl, warmly greets her, and with a smile says he was waiting, and Julia raises her head and asks if he is the same Daniel she was looking for. While Julia is still searching for her sister, Daniel drops a shocking piece of news. He tells the truth: Alice actually does not belong to the heroes' party at all. Julia was completely stunned by this news and let out a shocked scream. She grabbed Daniel's things and, with obvious indignation, asked if he had deceived her, explaining that she came only because she thought she was going to a party with her sister Alice. Daniel begins to panic, sweat dripping down his forehead, and he tells her that this is a complete surprise to him as well. Trying to calm her, he begs her to listen to him for at least a second. Trying to change the subject, Daniel asks Julia if it is true that Alice was her older sister when they studied together at the Academy of Magic. Julia begins to recall school years. Alice was almost a legend, a graduate with honors, but at the same time so kind that she approached and spoke to someone like Julia, who had dropped out of school back then. Suddenly, Julia's eyes lit up with excitement. She understood something. She looks up at Daniel, stars sparkling in her eyes, and asks if he wants to hear the whole story about how she and her sister first met. Daniel looks like he wants to be anywhere but here. He laughs awkwardly and tells her that he refuses this walk down memory lane. Watching from afar, Luna notices that Daniel's patience is clearly melting. All this noise seems pure boredom to her, while Julia meanwhile completely ignores his mood and stubbornly chatters about her sister. Julia raises a finger to emphasize and immediately plunges into her story, and, despite Daniel's attempt to stop it, Daniel leans toward Julia and whispers that there is actually a certain reason why her sister is not currently on the hero's team. Julia listens tensely, clearly puzzled by this sudden secret, and then Daniel starts spinning bloody tales saying that Alice is being manipulated by the cunning mage Orion. Supposedly she was supposed to be with the heroes, but she was deceived, and she almost begs to become Orion's apprentice, while Luna sees all this from behind the wall and openly feels disgust at his behavior. The thought that her legendary sister could become the apprentice of some stranger shocks Julia. She begins to tremble, imagining that the one who did this is not afraid of the gods at all. Daniel admits that he knows exactly how frightening Alice can become when she gets serious. He looks completely exhausted just from talking about her, and in his imagination Alice stands unwavering. He continues pretending, telling Julia that Orion is such a cunning fraud that he even deceived Alice, while Luna remains in the shadows and closely watches how this manipulation unfolds. Luna is on the edge. She has gripped the stone wall so tightly that she trembles, thinking to herself that Daniel is officially the most disgusting person she has ever met. Watching from the shadows, Luna is stunned by the avalanche of lies Daniel pours out, and at that moment he suddenly turns to Julia and says, since she is an elite sorceress and very close to her sister, he has a special request for her. Daniel admits that his real goal is ultimately to convince Alice to join the hero squad. For this, he asks Julia for help to ruin Orion's reputation so that no one in the city trusts him. As soon as Orion is isolated, Daniel hopes to intervene and take care of the rest. He tells Julia that if they disturb that guy a little, Orion will break and show his true face. He looks her straight in the eyes and asks if she is capable of doing this for him. Luna barely believes what she hears. She peeks out from behind the wall with a completely empty, as if frozen face. He could not understand how someone could fall for such an obvious, clumsy lie. Julia is now insanely angry and loudly declares that she will expose Orion as a fraud. That is exactly how she considers him, and she does it for the sake of her sister. Luna, meanwhile, stands nearby, simply stunned. She cannot believe that the girl really believed Daniel's tales. Even worse, Daniel whispered additional gossip to her that Orion and Alice have recently often been left alone, locked in the alchemy workshop for experiments, and the very thought of their seclusion drives Julia mad. Jealousy devours her and she decides not to wait any longer. She considers it unfair and says she will rush there immediately. Julia, stomping her feet, headed to the workshop, and Luna froze behind a tree in panic. She has no idea how to handle this mess or what to do. Luna realizes she cannot just stand aside, so she starts following them and whispers to herself, if it becomes dangerous or everything gets out of control, she will intervene and stop it. The scene smoothly shifts to Orion's alchemy workshop, a sturdy, reliable building where he and Alice worked. Alice fusses, helps everyone, and tightly squeezes her plush teddy bear. Noticing that Orion seems a bit thoughtful, she gently asks what he is thinking about. Orion clutches the dark samples they studied. At first, he brushed her off and said it was nothing, he was just thinking. But then he changed his mind, deciding that finally the time had come to explain to her how his magic works, and when he began to speak, Alice was so stunned that she blurted out, "Are you serious?" Holding the materials in his hands, Orion decided, if they continue working together, she deserves to know the truth. He thought that as soon as she learns his secret, and she will understand that there is no longer any point in being his apprentice, so she will probably just leave. Orion says that he really should have told her his secret much earlier, and Alice happily beams and says she is thrilled. She desperately wants to finally learn the secret of his magic, but their conversation is abruptly interrupted by a loud knock on the workshop door. They both turn to the entrance, and Orion asks who it could be. Orion opens the door and sees Yulia. She is all tense and says that she heard supposedly a man named Orion lives in this place. Orion raises his hand in response to her gaze, calmly and confidently making it clear that he is the one she is looking for. As soon as he confirms this, Yulia points at him with her finger, loses her temper, calls him the root of all evil, and says he better prepare for what is coming. Orion is completely confused by that childish energy, but Yulia does not slow down. She comes closer and swears to tear the mask off him and save Alice at any cost. Alice peeks out from behind Orion, completely puzzled by what is happening, and Orion puts two and two together. Probably this girl is either a friend or a relative of Alice. Without defending himself, Orion with a slight smile invites her into the workshop and asks if she wants to come in for a minute. Yulia blushes even more at how relaxed he behaves. She asks if he is just pretending to be cool and asks him to stop mocking her. He freezes there silently for a moment. He still huffs and stomps into the workshop. Orion, crossing his arms and clearly irritated, asks Alice who this girl is. Alice is equally puzzled by the sudden guest. Before anyone can react, Yulia rushes forward and shouts, calling for her sister, and Alice is in complete shock. She appeared out of nowhere. Yulia hugged Alice in a huge embrace and joyfully exclaimed that she found her sister, and Alice remained silent from the sudden hug, unable to utter a word. Alice is panicking and shouting at Julia to get off her, especially since they are standing right in front of Orion, who looks completely exhausted from this drama in the background. Alice finally composes herself, clears her throat, and tells Orion that she will handle the introduction herself, while Julia just stands and frowns. Julia does not hide her feelings at all. She is sulking and looking away, as if she would rather be anywhere but here. Julia complained to Elise that it was not even worth getting to know someone like Orion, and this upset Elise. She called her a fool and sharply cut her off. How dare you be so rude right in front of her lord. They start arguing with each other, and Orion awkwardly stands aside until he finally sighs and says to Alice, just introduce her quickly so we can move on. Alice sighed, pointed at Julia, and explained that the noisy child is a girl. She found this out back at the Academy of Magic. He continues to explain that Julia was actually her junior at school. He studied at that school and specialized in preparing catalysts. Julia points her finger directly at Orion and shouts that he is completely deceiving her sister. Alice stands behind, completely stunned by this sudden accusation, and Orion just sighs, holding a cup of tea and thinking that lately he has been drawn into such irritating misunderstandings too often. Julia insists that Alice wake up and see the truth. She says she heard a rumor about what Orion is really like. Julia shouts that Orion is just a leech who wants to live at Alice's expense, and this accusation is so ridiculous that Orion loses his head and spits tea everywhere in shock. While Orion chokes on his drink and coughs in the background, Alice is horrified. She asks Julia where she got such a rude word as leech. Elise quickly closed Julia's mouth to stop the nonsense, apologized to Orion, and explained that this child is stubborn. Once an idea takes hold in her head, she stops listening, and Orion just looked at them and remarked that she really resembles Elise herself. Julia continues to struggle, making muffled sounds, while Alice firmly presses her palm to her mouth to make her be quiet. Finally, Julia broke in with a word with fire in her eyes. She said that since everything turned out this way, she has a new plan. She grabbed Alice by the hand and said that she would also join Orion's squad. This completely caught Alice by surprise. Julia explains her plan. She will join to expose Orion as a fraud and eventually return Alice to the guild. Orion just stands and watches. He stood completely bewildered by the whole situation. Julia can no longer endure Alice's selfishness and decisively tells her sister that she needs to come to her senses and face the truth. The sisters immediately clashed in clouds of dust, and Orion just stands aside, feeling all the tension. Orion swallowed his tea and pondered. Julia said as if he was wearing a mask, but he had no idea what she meant. He glanced at the supplies and suddenly realized, Julia is a specialist in preparing catalysts. She could greatly help their research. While Julia continues to tease Alice, Orion cannot get rid of his doubts. Will this girl agree to help them at all? He keeps sipping tea and thinks that if Julia finally wants to return Alice to the guild, then her joining the team is very convenient for him. Orion stood among the devices and with a bitter smile admitted to himself that his plans usually fail, and Alice returned to him and asked what his final decision was. Yulia, smiling confidently, tells Orion that letting someone like her in is a bad idea. She sees through any of his lies. Alyssa almost falls from exhaustion due to her sister's attitude and whispers to Yulia that she is about to see Orion's true face. Alyssa puts an end to the argument. She grabs Yulia by the cheek and coldly tells her that she will join the party anyway, whether she likes it or not. Orion stands calmly and tells everyone that he really doesn't care about this situation. Alyssa loses control and bursts out with a loud scream of disbelief, and Yulia just freezes from the sudden noise. Yulia begins to radiate dark energy. Her gaze becomes piercing. She asks if they are just mocking her and warns them to be better prepared for what will come next. Orion looks very awkward, and Alyssa grumbles in the corner. She is annoyed that he accepted Yulia so quickly, while she herself had to fight much longer for his favor. Finally, the group sets off to Orion's alchemical workshop, a quiet stone cottage hidden in the forest. In the workshop, Alyssa hesitates a little and asks if they are even allowed to be there because she is afraid of accidentally overhearing secrets about how his magic works. Yulia grabs her sister again, and Alyssa gets lost in thought. She admits that it feels strange to listen to his secrets since she is not even his official apprentice yet. Orion looked intently at Alyssa and suddenly realized she is truly serious and sincere in everything. Orion directly tells the girls that he himself doesn't really understand how his magic works, so they shouldn't rely on it too much, and Alyssa sits on the bed next to Yulia and again asks if he is really sure he should tell them about it. As soon as the second Orion gives the green light, Alyce's eyes light up with excitement. She is almost dying of curiosity. She wants to hear every word he says. Yulia hisses at her sister for rudeness, but Alice does not back down. She says that lessons from some secondary boy who is probably a fraud will not help them at all. Yulia pouts and insists that she also wants to join, and Alice bursts out screaming, clearly irritated by her stubbornness. Suddenly, Alice sharply turns 180 degrees and bursts with admiration. She tells Yulia that it is worth listening to his valuable lecture and even suggests that they become his students together. Alice literally shines with euphoria, and Yulia just looks at her with a dead gaze. Yulia categorically refuses. She says she hates this idea. The sisters begin to argue and shove each other, and Orion awkwardly stands up and asks if they can start the lesson already. Orion begins the lecture with the basics. He says that usually magic works through a connection with an element and a spoken word, which gives a tangible result. For example, lighting a fire when you are cold, and asks them if they have always understood it that way. Alice raises her hand and agrees, but still does not forget to emphasize that Orion is the only exception to this rule. Yulia looks completely puzzled and asks again what he is even talking about. Does he really want to say that magic can be used in a completely different way? And Alice just looks at him, waiting for his move. Alice asks him to show them the movement he makes. Orion rubs the back of his head and awkwardly admits that doing it makes him quite embarrassed. Although embarrassed, Orion takes a fighting stance, forms his hand into a gun shape, and whispers a fire spell that will destroy enemies. Orion freezes in a dramatic pose in the middle of the workshop, and the girls watch him without taking their eyes off. He is serious when he is about to show his unique style of magic. Yulia is intently looking at Orion and says that nothing happened. She is not surprised at all, saying, logically, he has no rank and probably does not know how to use magic. And at that moment, Orion calls Bagriana Mana and orders her to shoot. A fireball instantly appears before him, and Yulia is left completely stunned. Alyssa is wildly excited, asks Yulia if she saw that, boasts that it is the true power of her master, and Yulia just stands in shock. Yulia instantly came to her senses and flared up again. She hissed at Orion not to pretend to be cool because of some tiny fireball, and Orion waved it off and said he was not trying to brag. To prove her point, Yulia decisively steps forward and says, if he wants to be my sister's teacher, he must be on her level. She utters a spell to knock down enemies and summons her own flame. Yulia, with a proud smile, arrogantly boasts that her magic is only the product of her best imagination. Orion approaches closer to examine the fire she summoned, and Alyssa looks completely exhausted from the constant quarrels. Yulia asks Orion if he finally understood that he is not worthy to be near her sister, and Orion admits somewhat embarrassed that he never truly felt worthy. The mood becomes a bit more serious. Alyssa looks at Orion with surprise when he does not respond to her sister's insults. Orion bows his head, his face hidden in shadow, and he addresses Alyssa directly as if finally ready to sincerely explain how his magic works. Orion poked the flame and revealed a great secret, whispering to the girls why his magic is different because he really sees this mana. Alisa and Yulia just stood with blank expressions, completely stunned by what they heard. Orion begins to sweat. He realizes that he has finally spoken his greatest secret aloud and recalls his childhood. Back then, Daniel pointed at him and laughed, calling him a liar in front of everyone. Emily tried to stop him, and random passersby shouted at Orion because he was so distracted by Mana that he almost ran into them. He remembers how lonely it was to be that weirdo. People in the town constantly gossiped behind his back, said he was always in the clouds and did not notice what was happening around. Standing now, Orion thinks about how crazy he looks in the eyes of others. To an ordinary person, he is just someone who talks about things that do not exist. Alice breaks the silence and repeats his words. Do you really see Mana? It seems she is trying to grasp this whole idea. Orion notices her calmness and says that she does not look shocked at all, and Alice touches her face and admits, inside she completely loses control, she just does not show it outwardly. Julia, however, is not calm at all. She shouts that she cannot believe such a crazy story, but suddenly freezes and realizes, if Orion is telling the truth, then this is the only explanation for how her sister became a master of magic so quickly. In Julia's head, it feels like a short circuit. Orion barely smiles and says that everything is fine. Her reaction is exactly what he expects every time he tells the truth. Orion was mesmerized, staring at the fireball that Julia had created earlier. For him, it was not just a flame. He clearly saw its structure and how the emerald mana weaves into the very heart of the red-orange energy. Orion crossed his arms and cannot help but acknowledge Julia. He says that the way she organizes her mana really impresses. It shows that he is not just babbling. Julia sighs and irritably asks Orion if he really thinks he can just look at her magic and understand how it works. Orion is not just talking. He reaches out and starts spinning mana spheres, saying that a bit of green mana needs to be added, then calls the carmine mana to join. With a simple command, fire, Orion releases a spell, and right before them explodes a huge flame that completely fills the room with heat and light. Julia is thrown back by that incredible force. She is terribly scared and shouts that his fireball is many times bigger than hers, and that is simply impossible. Alice looks at her sister with a self-satisfied, proud expression and asks if she saw that, then tells Julia that Orion can copy any mana he sees, and Julia just sits in the shadow, looking completely broken. Alice is now burning with emotions, shouting that although everything has been crazy lately, now finally everything is clear to her because she knows his secret. Julia starts wildly waving her hands, losing her head over the injustice, and shouting that this is a complete deception. It shouldn't be like this. Alice puts her hands on her hips and sharply tells Julia to stop before she really gets angry, and Julia tries to respond, insisting that this whole situation is nonsense and shouldn't exist at all. Alice pays no attention to logic. She glows with inspiration and exclaims that the ability to do the impossible is exactly what makes Orion truly special. Julia stands completely stunned. She can only simply whisper Alice's words, he is the one who creates the impossible. Julia looks at Orion with eyes full of stars and already calls him her master. Orion raises his hand, embarrassed by such a sudden wave of adoration, asks to slow down a bit. This is getting out of control. Alice intervenes to not waste time, reminding Julia that her noble mission is actually to take Alice home. Orion just looks at both of them tiredly, and Alice coughs and suggests finally returning to the main topic. Alice gathered all her courage and agreed that they need to stay focused. She turned to Orion and asked what had long been troubling her. How exactly does mana look through his eyes? Orion begins to explain, pointing into the air where others see nothing, and says that mana still rages everywhere, full of energy, and for him, these are simply separate spheres of light. While Alice and Julia listen attentively, Orion pauses for a moment in thought and sincerely admits that explaining to someone how he sees the world is actually much harder than it seems. Alice, stunned, says she can't even imagine that and asks, does he really mean that his entire vision is constantly filled with those mysterious spheres shining with 6 elemental colors? Orion quickly corrects her, indifferently noting that actually it's not 6 colors, and Alice loses her composure and shouts, demanding an explanation of how mana can disobey the rule of 6 elements. Orion says that it is precisely because of this that he once failed so badly with textbooks on modern magic. The mana he sees does not fit into just 6 categories, so lessons based on this idea never made sense to him. It seems Alice is finally putting everything together. She asks whether the secret to why he uses magic so easily without spells is hidden in his special vision of mana.